A very good morning, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, and dedicated advocates for climate action. A very warm welcome to each of you as we're back for the eighth day. It's an honor to stand before you as your MC for this remarkable gathering. In collaboration with the Malaysia Pavilion at COP29 in Baku, Climate Governance Malaysia proudly hosts Malaysian support for COP29, a virtual forum bringing together thought leaders, innovators, and experts dedicated to advancing impactful climate solutions. This two-week program reflects the Malaysia Pavilion's daily themes, delving into sustainability and reinforcing Malaysia's commitment to a resilient and sustainable future. Today's theme is climate resilience, subnational leadership. Subnational leaders, including local governments, state authorities, and grassroots organizations, are at the forefront, facing the impacts of climate change while driving transformative, community-centered solutions. Today's sessions will explore how these leaders are pioneering innovative strategies, fostering community empowerment, and crafting forward-thinking policies to enhance climate resilience. We will delve into the essential ingredients for success: collaboration, data-driven approaches, and scaling nature-based solutions. This conversation is not just timely, it is essential. It emphasizes how subnational leadership forms the backbone of a resilient and thriving future, where every effort counts towards a more sustainable and inclusive world. And now, please join me in welcoming Dr. Gary Theseira, esteemed Director of Climate Governance Malaysia, to share his insights on COP29, along with Datuk Daryl Weber, Board of Trustees of Forever Sabah. Dr. Gary, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Aisya, and once again, very good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to see everyone here again. I trust you're all well as we move closer to winding up COP29 in Baku. As usual, we have a distinguished guest with us this morning. This morning, it's Datuk Daryl Weber, and I'll be in conversation with him very shortly as we look at today's theme at the Malaysia Pavilion, which is climate resilience, subnational leadership. Before that, a little bit of a summary of what's been going on in Baku. It is a busy time there. The delegates are painfully aware that they're running out of time. It is the time when the high-level sessions are on, ministers are on the ground. And, I recall saying last week how there were some delegations that were claiming that some of the decisions that needed to be reached, for example, under the new collective quantified goal for climate finance, some delegations were saying that the quantum as well as the donor base for that program was a political decision, could not be taken at the official level, needed to be moved up to the political level. But like I said, it's a busy time because not only are delegates negotiating the NCQG, there's also under the Global Goals for Adaptation, the UAE BELEM Work Program, there's also the Mitigation Work Program, and finally the Just Transition Work Program, all of which need to actually be aligned. And one of the dangers that delegates face sometimes is when they're dealing with all of these work streams. There's the danger that they might neglect a particular work stream and allow something to fall through in that one work stream, which will then impact actions across all work streams. So, for example, you will see developing countries being very conscientious about the fact that finance is essential to drive all work streams. In fact, not just finance, but as well the means of implementation. For this reason, we see that in the discussion on the Just Transition Work Program in particular, we find that developed countries are putting a very strong focus on mitigation in the just transition, whereas developing countries want a more rounded just transition that encompasses not just mitigation, but also adaptation and more broadly, the means of implementation. You will also hear that there's difficulty in moving text forward because of something called an imbalance in the text. Now, what does an imbalance in the text mean? Basically, The co-facilitators or co-chairs accept input from parties and on their own responsibility produce a text which they forward to the parties and offer it to the parties as the basis for negotiations moving forward. Parties feel, however, that the text that they have submitted is not included to a sufficient degree in this draft text that is supposed to be the basis for negotiations. They will reject the text until they see that their input is adequately reflected in the text. And it doesn't have to be in complete form. Many times parties will be completely satisfied if it's simply copied out of the documents that are submitted and pasted into the draft text intended as the basis for negotiations. As long as it's there, then the negotiations can move forward. However, a number of parties, large parties like the G77 in China, like-minded developing countries, the Africa group, and a large number of members of the Arab group have indicated that the text is not balanced, meaning that their views are not adequately reflected in the text to their satisfaction, and the text cannot be then used as the basis for negotiations. It's practically impossible to introduce new text into a negotiating text once it's much easier to remove text. And that's the first issue that is actually holding up the moving forward of text under the Just Transition work program. On some substantive issues, we see that parties also are deeply concerned about how the just transition is going to be achieved, especially when the carbon budget that would be consistent with achieving the targets under the Paris Agreement temperature goal are now small, because developed countries and developing countries, we've used up much of the development, the carbon budget space. And with a small budget space remaining for emissions, it's going to be very, very expensive to have a just transition. Developing countries are also very deeply concerned that developed countries have not adequately reduced their emissions. There's a term known as the pre-2020 gap in mitigation ambition by developed country parties, meaning that during the period of the Kyoto Protocol, when developed countries were supposed to be reducing their emissions by as much as 45 degrees relative to 1990 levels, there was insufficient emissions reductions going on. And what's worse is that the IPCC projections on the Annex 1 party or developed country emissions show no signs of slowing between 2020 and 2030. So given all of these, it's only quite natural that developed countries are very, very concerned about how to bring about just this just transition in an environment where, if you look at the Philippines now, for example, the number of storms that they've received, even within a week, is becoming almost ridiculous. Parties are also deeply concerned that requirement for global justice when we are talking about the just transition, and that there's a strong link in what we're talking about is the ability to deliver justice domestically in an equitable manner. And this is going to be very difficult given the circumstances. Climate action, we are told, is at the core of sustainable development and poverty eradication. In fact, some countries believe it's the other way around. In fact, it is sustainable development and poverty eradication that will actually enable climate action. So this call to implement the just transition in a situation where sustainable development is assured and poverty eradication is assured is a bit difficult for countries. Under the response measures, developed countries have also been pushing back on the idea that the 5-year work plan to analyze and assess reports on the negative impacts of unilateral measures. Developed countries have always rejected this idea. They've been very, very protective of any kind of unilateral measures that they've been implementing. But finally, a text was able to be agreed upon, which reads to analyze, to assess, and report on the impacts of measures taken to combat climate change, including unilateral measures that constitute a means of arbitrary or unjustifiable discrimination or as a disguised restriction on international trade. So all of these things are the issues of the day over there in Baku. And in some cases, as in the latter case, there is some space for moving forward. But on many areas, particularly when a text is unbalanced and there's an inability or an unwillingness of the co-facilitators to include party text, unfortunately, the text cannot move forward. All right. That winds up the summary this morning on the news out of Baku. And I turn now to our special guest this morning, Datuk Daryl Weber. Datuk Daryl has spent many, many years with the RSPO. And in fact, he runs his own consultation firm at the present time. And he's here to share his views on subnational leadership. Of course, we know that climate action needs to occur at both national and subnational levels, and that policies and strategies at the federal, state, and local levels do need to be aligned so that we can prevent conflicts and we can improve the effectiveness of these plans through mutual support. When it comes to this, the commitment of all the stakeholders, all the parties is important. There should be clarity on how resources are allocated, how tasks are allocated, and there should be a fair bit of integration and coordination in the implementation to ensure that all of the targets, whether they're mitigation targets or adaptation goals, are achieved and benefit state, national, as well as local levels. Now, at the federal level, of course, in 2029, the government, following an engagement with all states and government institutions, launched the first national policy on climate change. But at the time, there seemed to be very little response by the states to this. I think a number of states, Malacca, Penang, and a number of regions, in particular the Iskandar Development Region in Johor, took notice of this policy and began regional or state level initiatives. But it wasn't all the states. This changed in 2023 when your home state, the state of Sabah, the Legislative Assembly approved an amendment to its forestry enactment, and this paved the way for the Sabah government to begin collecting revenue for carbon sequestration by forest. And it has finally borne fruit 11 years later. This year in 2024, Sabah has registered its first certified nature-based carbon sequestration project. Last year, Sarawak became the first and in fact the only state to pass legislation on climate change. That being said, we have to bear in mind that a federal climate change bill is still pending. But the implication of the passage of the environment bill in Sarawak, the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions bill, to safeguard Sarawak's environment by implementing strategies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, to achieve net zero in line with federal aspirations to also achieve net zero by 2050. All these things are leadership roles that are occurring at the state and the sub-state level, subnational levels. Given your role as a climate advisor at the state level, the state of Sabah, how do you believe the state or the states view the national climate policy? Is it something that is often raised? Is it referenced? Is it even mentioned in meetings on state climate change policy?
Thanks, Gary. Thanks for that long background. I think with the climate change policy, personally, I was taken by surprise. I didn't know even that there was one coming up. I only found out about it like the day before it was officially launched. And then I thought maybe I was unique in Sabah, not knowing this was coming. And so I asked around, and the people I asked, of course, maybe it may be too small a sample size. No one knew in government that this was coming. So I guess we view it with trepidation, with a healthy dose of suspicion, with some incredulity.
Incredulity, yeah.
Yeah. That we were not really informed. Maybe some small portion of the government was consulted. I don't know. I haven't found who they are. And given my role as climate advisor, I should be able to know who has been consulted, but I can't find any. Nevertheless, I did. So in summary, we didn't know it was going to be launched. This new version of the climate change policies.
Okay.
We view it with some trepidation. As such, we don't talk about it really, which is a shame because I think a lot of good work has gone into the policy. And I did read, I did glance through at it. And I think, it's not bad, but I think there are some, it could be even better, right? I think, for example, the policy acknowledges that Sabah and Sarawak has some policies that overlap. That's good. However, the policy prescriptions to this overlap was vague. And that could have been probably avoided with some proper consultation, I guess. And another instance that I noticed that there's some factual errors. I give you a classic one on page 25, I think, of the policy, which put as a poster child of the impacts of climate in Sabah, this Pulau Gaya, which is opposite KK, and saying it very vulnerable to etc. So for your information, Sabah has done its own studies on impacts, vulnerability and adaptation climate due to climate, and Pulau Gaya was nowhere on our list. Mainly because I don't think the description of that island was the impacts would be what was it? It's it was described as Pulau Gaya in Sabah is a region highly sensitive to climate change, experiencing both seasonal variations and long-term climate shifts. General statement. I think everybody is. I wouldn't say it's highly sensitive to climate change. It's Kota Kinabalu is just across that is also highly sensitive. In fact, probably more impacts because we have a lot of infrastructure on the other side. And so on. So, some small factual errors which could have been avoided. So I think overall the state feels that we will still continue to pursue on our path to inform the federal government that we are doing certain things on policies, on studies that could very well and positively contribute to a national policy, a national climate action. I think you probably agree, Gary, that this is supposed to be a national effort. And it's all of government, all of society effort. And to bring all of government and all of society on board, you have to engage in a very special way, particularly acknowledging that we have 3 different regions in Malaysia now. And the 3 regions in Malaysia, Malaya, Peninsular Malaysia, Sabah and Sarawak, has to walk as true partners on this. I think we have to come to realization, particularly for a state like Sabah, we do not want to be merely consulted upon on such important policy matters. We want to be there at the the design portion of the policy. And it helps to save a lot of time, right? If you get us on board at the design stage, you don't get us wondering, why is this policy so weird? It doesn't take into consideration Sabah's issues, etc., etc. And then you might get pushback for sometimes emotional reasons rather than objective reasons, right? So, we want to avoid all this. And I think it is worthwhile for the federal government or national government to consider bringing Sabah, Sarawak, Peninsular Malaysia together at the design stage of these policies. You cannot say that, once you've crafted 30 pages, 50 pages, and then say, oh, it's still at design stage. No, that's not design stage. And then when you ask for a stakeholder consultation and treat Sabah as a mere stakeholder, there are times when I've seen the policy where I said, well, no matter how much we tweak this and dot the I's and cross the right T's, it's still going to end up strange. There's a saying, you can't wrap an old fish in new newspaper. Right.
Yeah.
So no matter how much paper we put over it,
Yeah.
it's still be an old
It's still
smelling
an old
fish.
fish. Yeah. So I mean, given the difficulty in bringing everyone together, I mean, it should be done. I think your statement about the fact that we are in this together, I think that's understood. That there's I think the statement about the whole of government, all of nation approach, I think bears repeating, even though it's something that innately we know has to happen. No country can address climate change, with bits of it excised out. We can't excise out any sectors. We can't excise out, any land. It sort of goes without saying. Is this apparent? I don't want to say dissatisfaction, but it might be. But the fact that views are not taken into consideration, a huge reason for why states appear to craft their own policies. Once again, it's a little bit of a tit for tat. You're not telling us what you're doing, so we don't tell you what we're doing. We'll just do it and invite you to the launch, as it were, or the inception report or whatever it is. Does this result in us sort of working in different directions? How hazardous do you think this could be? What does it portend for having unified, comprehensive, and integrated plan to move forward?
I mean, looking at this from a very macro perspective, I think it's very dangerous that we are not aligned as a nation. And I think to ignore the fears of society, let's say the less developed society. I mean, we all know Sabah is the poorest state in Malaysia, one of the poorest, has the most poorest districts in Malaysia. 8 out of the top 10 poor districts are in Sabah. So therefore, and the impacts in Sabah and Sarawak on certain aspects are more than Peninsular Malaysia. So you combine the two, right? Being poor and impacts higher, we are probably the most vulnerable. And therefore, we should have special attention on matters like adaptation to climate, right? And we also, at the same time, view the transition to a low carbon economy as an opportunity, because after doing our recent assessment on our greenhouse gas inventory, we think there are some gaps in information, but there's every indication that we are a net sink when it comes to emissions. So therefore, you can project that us moving into a low carbon economy will be less painful, and we could move even faster. So if that is the case, then we would want policies to help us move faster into the low carbon economy with the least amount of pain. But at the same time, being ready for adaptation, because climate change is here. Many people don't understand it, and it is very, a lot of times people see climate change as very abstract. No, there's blind spots for everybody. They don't see the tangible impacts yet, They see the weather change. They don't see the climate change and its impact. So I think the state government, it's very important for us to be united as a nation And I think the state governments, on the other hand, are very worried about the transition issues. I think it'll be a lie to say that there's going to be no one left behind in this climate transition. There will be some winners and some losers, and I think some people in Sabah are fed up of being losers when it comes to policies. So we want to be able to influence national policies.
Leadership and initiatives at the state level are clearly a good thing, because no one understands the situation on the ground better than local government, and in the state better than state governments. And data is something that should be agnostic in terms of how it should be used. Do you think there's a role for improving trust and increasing confidence if the different levels of government were to share data, to co-design, to co-implement mitigation and adaptation measures? And if we just use as an example, the corporate sector doesn't appear to have this disconnect. Companies, based in different regions of Malaysia, simply have no problems getting together, planning, designing, strategizing, and then implementing, measures, corporate measures, growth, business, etc. And they seem to develop these without any problem. Are there some tools, some ideas, some frameworks that we can use that will actually help to produce? Maybe something that I've raised before, the fact that Malaysia is very vocal about common but differentiated responsibilities at the international level. And at the national level, there are states that are high emitting states. There are states that are not. There are states that are high removal, sequestration states, and others that are not. And would that be the kind of framework that we could bring in with the sort of seamless systems that the corporate sector has, which don't seem to be problematic at all, working between states? What do you think?
Firstly, let me just say that having run a multinational international organization based on consensus, I pity those people in the UN and I pity the federal government agencies who has to coordinate this. Let me just say that. However, I also think that like you just said, right, there must be some way to tie all these states, subnational authorities together. And having been in the corporate sector in my life for half of my career, or more than half of my career, I think the one way that the corporate sector is good and helps to do this is to trickle down or share the pain, right? As I say, my bosses used to say, okay, here's my KPI, now I'm going to share the pain, right? So share the pain equally. And if you ask the states, I doubt, no, I'm almost certain that no states understands their role in meeting the NDCs. None, zero. I didn't when I started, trying to understand Sabah's role in all of this. When I asked around, hey, do you have data for our greenhouse gas inventory in Sabah? Zero knowledge on this. They just said, well, Putrajaya asked me for data. I have no idea what the data is for, and I have no idea how it's analyzed. And therefore, you don't get ownership, right? You have zero ownership on these issues by the states. And particularly, so that's zero ownership of the data, zero understanding of the data. And then if the burden, the share of the pain is not shared equitably among the states, then zero ownership of meeting the NDCs. And so to me, the prescription is clear. You have set the KPIs based on the NDCs. Now let's understand how we share that burden of meeting these NDCs. Sabah and I probably one or two other states have done the greenhouse gas inventory. We are ready to share, or for anyone to scrutinize that greenhouse gas inventory. And based on where we are today, let's understand what is our contribution. But also understand that being a net sink gives us an advantage
Mhm.
to transition into the low carbon economy. That advantage needs to lead to getting us out of the current predicament we are in, which is being labeled as one of the poorest states in Malaysia. So understand that we are happy to share the burden. We think, for example, that being a net sink, we shouldn't be imposed on, let's say this, I was asked this by other bureaucrats. They say, well, we are net sink. Why should we have carbon tax on companies operating in Sabah when we are already a net sink, for example? I mean, that's a valid question, and but a complex answer.
Yeah. I do would like to have you continue, but we are running out of time. So perhaps you could leave our audience with your final thoughts, take-home message on subnational, local level leadership. What's a big snippet in 30 seconds that you could leave us with?
Local level leadership. I think well, Sabah is trying to lead in some way, like understanding what is our emissions, where we are in terms of the greenhouse gas inventory. We have done our studies on what the impacts would be, where are the vulnerable areas, and how we should adapt. I think, and we are advocating based on our own leadership, that the federal government do, one, involve us in the design of policies at the beginning. Two, the data that comes out from as a result of this to support those policies should come from Sabah and analyzed in Sabah, so we understand and have ownership. Third, costs and benefits related to such policies be done separately for 3 regions rather than aggregated as a national cost and benefit analysis. Because I think if you aggregate it as at a national level, Sabah would lose out because the costs that are greater in transition would be in Peninsular Malaysia, and Sabah would be carrying an extra burden of trying to subsidize, let's say, the higher emitting states. So I think these are the messages that I have for the audience.
Thank you very, very much, Datuk. Ladies and gentlemen, our guest this morning has been Datuk Daryl Weber, who runs his own consulting firm, advisory services, and has a great deal of experience with the RSPO. We thank him for this very frank discussion this morning, and hope that the information provided can help move us forward towards greater integration in achieving not just greater resilience, but also contributing a role of Malaysia as a leader in the ASEAN region as well. I'd like to turn it back to the CGM Secretariat. Aisya.
Thank you, Dr. Gary and Dr. Daryl, for yet another insightful discussion. As a quick reminder, each day begins with a 30-minute breakfast chat hosted by Dr. Gary and his guest speakers, where they will delve into his daily observations and reflections. These sessions will be recorded on our CGM channel and periodically streamed by the Malaysia Pavilion during session transitions. Now, it's my pleasure to welcome Tunku Datuk Paduka Jaafar Nong, volunteer of CGM, to the stage to deliver today's welcoming remark.
Good morning, distinguished guests and participants. It is an honor to welcome you to Day 8 of our event. Today's theme, Climate Resilience, Subnational Leadership, highlights the critical role of state and local governments in addressing climate challenges and building climate resilience. For those of you who are joining for the first time, we are grateful to have you with us. All our sessions are recorded and available on our official CGM YouTube channel, allowing you to revisit insights from earlier discussions. Malaysia is at a crossroad. The catastrophic impacts of climate change are no longer distant threats. They are unfolding disasters that devastated lives, destroy livelihoods, and unravel the very systems that sustain us. Floods have become an annual calamity. displacing thousands and turning once thriving communities into wastelands. Highland and steep slopes are scarred by landslides, triggered by unrelenting rain, severing lifelines and destabilizing agriculture and tourism. Cities like Kuala Lumpur face the double threat of flooding and the urban heat island effect, where concrete jungles trap heat, pushing health systems and energy demands to their limits. Meanwhile, the choking haze from forests and peat fires disrupts lives, suffocates the economy, and tarnishes Malaysia's global image. In rural areas, rising temperatures and erratic weather patterns imperil food security, while health systems are overwhelmed by the resurgence of vector-borne diseases like dengue and malaria. Each disaster is a wake-up call, but the time for awakening has passed. The cost of inaction is measured in lives, livelihoods, and the irrevocable loss of hope for future generations. With Malaysia set to chair ASEAN next year, the world is watching. We must demonstrate leadership, not just for ourselves, but for the entire region. It is time for decisive, coordinated action that transcends rhetoric. The weight of this crisis demands a response, not tomorrow, not next year, but now. Sub-national leaders, our state and local governments, stand at the front line of this battle. They are closest to the communities bearing the brunt of climate change, and their leadership is pivotal in crafting solutions that are both localized and impactful. While national policies are important in shaping Malaysia's future, they can often feel abstract. Sub-national leadership can bridge the gap between policy and people, developing climate action plans tailored to regional vulnerabilities. This requires breaking out of silos, fostering cross-sector collaboration, and partnering with NGOs to mobilize resources and amplify impact. Local governments must work hand in hand with civil society to empower communities, translating high-level strategies into tangible outcomes. Public servants must rise to the occasion with courage, confidence, and unwavering commitment to the rakyat. They are tasked with making bold, sometimes unpopular decisions that prioritize long-term resilience. Rallying communities and ensuring actions are driven by the needs of the people, not politics. At the same time, implementing robust accountability mechanisms is essential to turn commitments into measurable outcomes. Transparent monitoring and progress tracking build trust and ensure that stakeholders across public, private, and civil sectors deliver on their promises. Furthermore, education is essential for fostering a society that understands and acts on climate challenges, transforming passive citizens into active participants to make greener choices, hold leaders accountable, and contribute to building climate resilience in their communities, respective communities. Sub-national leaders play a pivotal role in advancing public education by integrating climate awareness into school curriculums, ensuring that younger generations are equipped to address future challenges By prioritizing inclusive and widespread education, subnational leaders can ensure that all segments of society are informed, involved, and ready to drive meaningful climate action. As we engage in today's discussion, let us reflect on the critical role of subnational leadership in addressing the climate crisis. This is not merely a dialogue about policy. It is a call to action for every leader, stakeholder, and citizen to step up. Together, we can create a resilient and sustainable Malaysia that sets the standard for regional leadership in ASEAN and beyond. Thank you for joining us today. Let us seize this moment to drive change, inspire action, and build a future that we can all be proud of. We invite you to stay engaged with us through our CJM newsletter and our official LinkedIn page for continued updates. Have a good day.
Very well said. Thank you very much for your insights, Tunku Jaafar. Let's now welcome our first keynote from Ms. Narae Choi, who is a Senior Urban Specialist at World Bank Malaysia. She will be presenting her keynote titled The Role of Subnational Leadership in Malaysia's Green Transition. The floor is yours, Narae.
Thank you very much. I'm sharing my slide and I hope you can see the slide well.
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, sorry, let me put it. Okay. Yes, once again, thank you very much for inviting me to this Malaysia's COP29 parallel session, which I think is a great initiative. And once again, my name is Narae Choi. I'm a Senior Urban Development Specialist at the World Bank. And my work program includes an ongoing program in Malaysia, which focuses on promoting low carbon and resilient cities. And I will draw some insights from this ongoing program later. First of all, I really welcome the theme of today's session, which is on the role of subnational leadership in Malaysia's green transition or climate resilience. Having worked and researched on urban development for nearly 2 decades, I really feel that there is a lot that can be done at the subnational level, especially at the city level. And would like to discuss some of the actions that can really enable the cities to take more leadership in Malaysia's climate resilience. So first, I will discuss the important role of cities in general and bring this conversation to the Malaysia's context and highlight some of the challenges that local government authorities or PBTs in Malaysia are faced with, despite their high ambition and aspiration. And suggest some ideas, I would say, for discussion and as food for thought in thinking of ways to strengthen and empower PBTs in Malaysia. So first of all, globally, the role of cities in addressing climate change and taking climate action is well recognized. Notably, the Paris Agreement and its rule book recognizes non-party stakeholders' role in climate action. And they include cities and some national governments, as well as civil society, the private sector, and some others. So clearly, as you know very well, cities are big contributors to the carbon emission. Roughly 70% of carbon emissions are coming from the cities or in relation to the city space, globally speaking. And of course, cities with the density and the concentration of people and businesses are also very vulnerable to climate impact. So obviously, actions taken in city space can really contribute to the climate resilience globally, but of course in Malaysia as well. At the World Bank Group, we have a climate change action plan, which covers the period of 2021 and 2025. And it identifies cities as one of the 5 systems that are difficult to decarbonize and also challenging to adapt. As you can see, cities are, again, important focus of the systems transition and transformation that are required and needed for climate resilience and achieving net zero and other important goals. In thinking about strategic approach to cities' role and action in climate change, I really encourage you to consider the scale of different actions, because this really matters and applies to the Malaysian context as well. So climate action, there are of course global discussions as is happening this week. But when it comes to the nation states, of course, there are sort of agendas set at the country level, and which then translate into the subnational and city level, which then require, as was addressed at the opening remarks, actions from the communities and also corporations as well. So think about these scales, because even if we have great policies, regulations set at the high level, at the country level, translating them downward towards the subnational level and communities and corporations is critical for implementing these plans and visions. So if we go to the city level, especially, and think about actions that need to take place at the city level, there are obviously specific actions that are geared towards mitigation and low carbon development. So they are shown on the green box. There's also actions that can help enhance sort of the resilience of cities and their citizens vis-a-vis climate impact and promote adaptation, that they're shown in the orange box. And these actions all require enabling systems, which are sort of three buckets on top, namely efficient planning. So this sort of covers both physical, spatial planning, but also economic planning that really defines sort of the investments that are needed in the city. And of course, they cannot be sort of disconnected from finance. So how all these actions can be financed is a critical question for overall city management, but also for climate action in cities. And importantly, there are issues related to the institutions and capacities, basically how efficient city management is and how capacitated the staff of the city government and other stakeholders is. So these are the important issues that are relevant to many of the cities in the world, and as well as those in Malaysia. So now moving on to Malaysia's climate action. Just briefly, as you know very well, when it comes to Malaysia's share of the global greenhouse gas emission, it is not substantial. So as compared to sort of the high emitters, as we all know. But importantly, Malaysia has really taken a proactive and forward-looking approach to achieving net zero by 2050, and has truly mainstreamed sort of climate action, climate consideration in its sort of development vision for the nation. So this slide shows various strategic development policies and plans that are well coordinated and backed by various sectoral plans that include actually a lot of low carbon green transition and potentially some adaptation related plans across different sectors. So clearly, Malaysia is a country, again, think about the scales, and now, we are now at the country scale. Malaysia has a strong set of policies, regulations, and, setting the directions of the country, moving towards sort of green sustainable development with the climate considerations. If we spread these plans across, again, the levels of the government, then of course the picture gets a lot more complicated, as you can see on this slide. So the first sort of the bucket horizontally represents various actors in plans and sort of planning regime at the federal level. And the middle tier actually shows the sort of the actions happening basically at the state level. And the bottom tier shows, what is happening basically at the local level or the PBTs in Malaysia. So on the left vertical, we have highlighted a few key stakeholders. Of course, there are a lot more important stakeholders, again, at the federal level, and also state level, and also the local level. And the second vertical actually shows various low carbon, climate resilience related policies and plans, regulations. And there are quite a number of policies and plans across different sectors. As these are sort of the detailed, I would say, elaboration of the previous slide. And it is great to have these detailed plans and guidelines. But then I guess the key question is how these, again, how these plans will be translated into, other plans at the subnational level. And the third vertical sort of presents several low carbon urban developments specific plans and policies. So again, this is sort of the interconnection between overall climate resilience related policies and those that are specific to urban development. And on the right-hand side, I'm showing sort of the urban planning, physical planning regime that is well established in Malaysia, again, across different levels of the government. So again, when it comes to cities' climate action, for the cities or PBTs in Malaysia, it is not always straightforward or easy to navigate this rather complex landscape, I would say institutional landscape for climate action, or what we can call climate governance. And that leads to some, that deserves our sort of discussion or attention to some of the real challenges that that local governments in Malaysia are faced with or experiencing in this sort of institutional landscape in terms of taking concrete and impactful climate action. So as part of the World Bank's Technical Assistance Program on Low Carbon and Resilient Cities in Malaysia that I'm leading and that is currently ongoing, we are engaging several PBTs in Malaysia. And actually at the beginning of this month, I was in Malaysia and visiting different PBTs and having deeper discussions. And we have also done a lot of desk-based reviews of the PBT's climate action plans. And clearly, again, I will organize my discussion across 3 enabling systems that I showed earlier in my presentation. Malaysian cities have robust climate action plans at their level, guided by different federal and state level plans, guidance. So their climate action plans really show PBT's aspiration to do more in this space, like to achieve climate resilience. And interestingly, while as you can see in the previous slides, that adaptation or sort of resilience related policies and actions are rather absent. And I can highlight that as an area for future focus and then growth for sure in Malaysia. At the local level, as was already addressed in the opening remarks, like local governments are on the front line of dealing with all the climate impacts, notably caused by very frequent and unpredictable rain and result consequent flooding, and urban heat island effects and others. And so at the local level, adaptation is actually very high on their agenda as compared to the federal level or country level strategy. And at the same time, cities are also paying attention to greening their existing gray infrastructure, and they're thinking about various creative ways to sort of achieve a low carbon development and investments. However, PBT's have a very weak financial capacity to deliver on their sort of climate ambitions. And to begin with, PBTs in Malaysia, as compared to the peers in the region and globally, operate with very limited budget. And we've gathered some financial data from selected PBTs. The trend shows that the revenue is not substantially increasing as compared to expenditure, which means that there's really a limited space for PBTs to actually plan and invest in some of these actions going forward. And yet, we identified a bit of potential for the federal ministries or federal government to sort of provide further grant on some of the very well sort of prepared projects, both on climate action and otherwise. And I think this area can be really looked into further so that we can actually facilitate PBT's climate actions and investments, especially at the local level. Institutionally speaking, I guess I can actually move on to the next slide. Again, the institutional landscape that I showed in the previous slide, presents some real gaps that can be addressed through sort of concerted efforts and a focused action. So basically, aligning different policies across different levels. So I'm sort of looking at alignment between federal and state, federal and local. So they're represented by the number 1 and number 3 on the slide. And also that sort of like, alignment, like vertical alignment can be strengthened. But of course, like horizontal alignment, basically between low carbon, climate resilient urban development plans and the existing sort of urban planning documents can be also strengthened. Currently, they are not fully integrated and exist in some cases in, I guess, disconnect or silos. And at the planning level, these alignments, vertical and horizontal alignment, can be strengthened for sure. But at the same time, the key challenges are mostly at the implementation level in terms of, as I mentioned, like the lack of finance, sort of coordination engagement with the private sector and then other actors, civil society, represented by number 5 and 6 on this slide. So these are some of gaps I think we can address collectively across, again, the levels of the government in Malaysia. And when it comes to finance, again, according to various documents in Malaysia, the amount of financing or the scale of financing is enormous that is needed for really achieving the climate resilience ambition. At the same time, on the right-hand side, as I mentioned in the previous slide, this is from like one select PBT, and this may not be fully representative, but based on our discussion with the PBTs, the trend itself is quite similar in the sense that PBTs are operating with limited budget and oftentimes, decreasing or stagnating revenue while increasing expenditure. And this is something that we can really look into in Malaysia if we really want the PBTs and local governments to take a more, I would say, aggressive action. Without financing, it will be very difficult to put all these, ambitions and good plans into action. And that's where I guess I recommend we focus our effort and attention going forward. So just in concluding, then how we can really unlock Malaysian cities' full potential for climate action in taking that leadership in climate resilience for the whole country. Again, I would like to reiterate, as is the case in other countries around the world, PBTs, local government authorities or cities especially remain very central to Malaysia's green transition. And as was already mentioned, they're closest to their local communities, businesses, and also most directly affected by climate impacts. So if we acknowledge and agree to the importance of the PBTs or local governments in climate action, then some of the gaps identified earlier, again, seen from the PBT's perspective, sort of bottom up, may be worth being addressed actively. And in doing so, I argue that the federal government really can play a catalytic role by especially trying to mainstream climate resilience objectives across different national councils or different planning regimes and across different sectors and organizations. And that also includes, again, the vertical coordination and also ensuring alignment, this is sort of the vertical alignment part of federal, subnational, meaning state and local government priorities. And sometimes priorities are not always on climate action, or climate action is not always mainstreamed in the existing priorities. And so these are the areas where we can actually focus more on. And lastly, thinking of innovative financing approaches for PBTs. Clearly, given the current sort of financial status of the PBTs, they are really looking for alternative financing mechanisms. And that could be either sort of federal level fund for cities and municipalities. And, in other countries, we have a scheme such as Municipal Development Fund. And there can be one dedicated for, PBT's climate action in Malaysia, for example. And these are some of the recommendations that we are going to make as part of our program. And there can be other assistance that can be provided to PBTs to, better promote sort of public-private partnerships, or develop a more sort of bankable projects and etc. So clearly, there is a room for thinking about various and innovative financing mechanisms to turn these plans into actions. So I will stop here, leaving these as food for thought and for discussion. And I apologize for not being able to stay for the whole session because of other conflicting commitments, but I look forward to staying engaged with the various stakeholders in this meeting and going forward in Malaysia. Thank you.
Thank you, Narae, for your keynote. We shall now continue with our first panel today, titled Strengthening Community Resilience in Climate Preparedness and Disaster Response. This session features a distinguished panel of speakers, including YB Amira Aisya binti Abdul Aziz, committee member of the Johor Climate Change and Disaster Management Committee, Dr. Nur Eliza, senior lecturer, Center for Environmental Sustainability and Water Security, or IPASA at Universiti Teknologi Malaysia, Ms. Wong Yunshu, Means of Implementation and Support Working Group Coordinator for the Malaysian Youth Delegation, and this session will be moderated by Lieutenant Colonel Muhammad Syukri, Chief of Secretariat and Policy Planning and Coordination Division, Malaysia Civil Defence Force. Please join me in warmly welcoming our esteemed panelists as they lead us through this discussion.
Thank you, Avisana, and thank you, Climate Governance Malaysia, for organizing an online concurrent event, Malaysian support for COP29 in collaboration with the Malaysia Pavilion at COP29 in Baku. As climate change becomes more dangerous in Malaysia, local and state governments are taking action, and we have here invited three panelists, one from the local government, one from the local researcher and a civil society organization, which will explain their respective role in local climate resilience efforts as for today. And this online engagement will be created by me, Lieutenant Colonel Muhammad Syukri of the Malaysia Civil Defence Force. So initially, I would like to extend an invitation to our first panelist, Yang Berhormat Amira Aisya binti Abdul Aziz, who serves as a member of the Johor State Legislation Assembly of Puteri Wangsa and also the acting president of MUDA and a member of Johor Climate Change Committee. YB, the session is now yours.
Good morning, Lieutenant Syukri. I think YB is not in yet. Shall we proceed to another panelist first?
Yeah, sure. Okay. You settle with the YB technical issue. Before that, I believe we have recorded with Dr. Nor Eliza Alias from the Center of Environmental Sustainability and Water Security of IPASA UTM Johor Bahru, and she will address the local action from the researcher's perspective. So we shall proceed with her video.
Okay, thank you very much to Lieutenant Colonel Muhammad Syukri for inviting me, especially in this our session, and also to the Malaysia support for COP29 and the organizer Climate Governance Malaysia for this marvelous event. So for my session, I am really I would like to share particularly related to local climate action from the view of a local researcher. Okay, so I am Dr. Nur Eliza binti Alias, and I am from UTM, particularly from the Center for Environmental Sustainability and Water Security, IPASA. And I am also a senior lecturer and a group leader for the Hydraulics and Hydrology Research Group, which is in the Faculty of Civil Engineering, Universiti Teknologi Malaysia. Okay, so as we know, if we talk about disaster and climate, I'm sure there are many experts also in this program and in our session, other sessions, and I have been involved with climate-related research quite a long time, and I would like to share some of it with you guys. And I would also like to introduce that I'm also one of the member for an NGO organization, NADI Malaysia, National Disaster Management Association. And so without further ado, I would like to share on this particular topic of the related to our role as a local researcher in, you can say, fighting, not just fighting, but maybe living with climate. So before I start, maybe we would like we can try to ponder. So what is actually a researcher? A researcher is someone who studies a subject, especially in order to discover new information or reach a new understanding. So the keyword is like researcher, search, researcher. So we do that, but it does not particularly mean like us from the academics, but also I think many other persons, especially in any type of disciplines, governments, privates, we are all actually researching. As long as we are trying to search something, and we want to discover something new information, and we want to understand something. So we are practically we are all researchers. Okay, so because I'm an academic, so I would like to maybe share a bit on what is our new academia, and what we as academic is doing now, and what is our target. So basically, not just in Malaysia, but also globally, this concept of a quadruple helix, what we call as quadruple helix model, actually we need to be involved with these four main, I can say like department, which is academic, government, industry, and community. So what is this actually? So we as academic, we need to link, we need to serve to the all of these component, especially the government, industry, and community. So what we do, what we as a researcher, so actually what we want to target, what we want to provide is to this all of these sectors, which is quite a complete concept or model, which we call it quadruple helix model. Okay, and besides that, I think if you realize there's as an academic or researcher, there's actually so much more that we need to do. And not just research. For example, here I took from because I'm a researcher as well, so I took from there is this paper on what is identities of research active academics in universities towards a complete academic profession, cross-cutting different works of practice. So what we do, we academic work disciplines, we try to be an expert in a certain topic. We try to focus on a certain topic, have a deep understanding of a one of a disciplinary field, recognized possessive experts, and of course we do research. We need to be we try to move toward being a skilled researcher, gather of research building blocks, quality, innovative research, and also we are teachers, so we teach as well. And of course, I think not just us, but anybody who teach, anybody who gives knowledge needs to have some role model, research-based teaching, co-research with students. Let me on the pointer. And then we do some research together, teach the students, do something together, and then supervise, not just teach, but also if it is more deep into research, so we supervise, and we are a licensed officer. We share knowledge. We what we know, what we learn, we try to share with other people. For example, like this particular program today. So there are a lot of roles that we try to put, or a lot of hat that we try to wear. However, for me as a local researcher, particularly on climate, if we are involved with this, for example, previously this quadruple helix, and we involve with the students, and we share our knowledge, so actually we gain a lot more, right? So we gain more, when we gain more, we know more, so we want to know more, we seek knowledge more. So like this picture, this professor, so what is what do you think he is thinking right now? So if I look at this picture, it's like, oh, we have some more ideas. So that is the reason why we do all of this, because in the end we want to have more ideas, be more innovative, and to solve problems. So basically that is the role of researcher, and particularly us as an academics. Okay, so moving on, just some sharing on what I have done. This is because this is about climate. So what I have done actually related to research works and also consultancy works, which is directly related to climate. For example, this 2019, I have been involved with, for example, this knowledge gathering, or I have joined a disaster risk management attachment program in Japan. So this is an example of we seek knowledge, because why do we do this? Because we want to know how to solve some problems. Example, from this training that I've received, I have been involved as well with governments, and not just government, private also, on the, for example, this project in 2021 and 2023, which is on the development of a substructure guideline or report. Because, for example, at this time, as we know, due to climate change, the rainfall intensity becomes more extreme. So due to that, more recorded or event of landslide, plus when we when there occur landslide, and there also quite a really large amount of water. So some places, especially at the mountains, like in Gunung Jerai, it occurs not an emerging type of disaster. It is not new. It might occur in other places, but we can see that, for example, debris flow. So debris flow have been observed to occur more frequent. So that is, we might relate it to the intensity of the rainfall. And of course, due to other factors, it might be also due to the land use changes upstream of that catchment, and many more reasons. However, these are some of the example of research that we look into related to climate. For example, in 2019 to 2022, I did also a research project related to extreme rainfall. So we look into what is actually the trend of this extreme rainfall, and especially we look whether there is some event which exceed historical values, and if it exceeds, so what we can do about it. So for example, in one of my project, we tried to estimate a design rainfall, which we can include the climate change factor into it. For example, this one, due to the climate change, the pattern of the rainfall is not stationary anymore. If you know about frequency analysis and statistical, so in the changing climate, it relates to changing conditions. So when the changing conditions change, for example, the pattern, the trend of the rainfall. So some method that we do, that we use to design our rainfall values might not really work as it should be. This means that conventional method might not really work. So we need to explore on what are the methods that we can use to consider this climate change effect. So that is one of my projects as well. And then some of it is also related to guidelines, manual. So this shows our involvement with not just the government, but also the private sectors like CIDB. And many more research. And then more research, more training. When we do research with the industry, the government agency, so we know what are the problems. When we know more problems, so we have more things to solve. So when we have things to solve, we will crack our heads to try to solve them. We get more ideas, we get more knowledge. So I think that is one of the most important role of local researcher, especially in not combating climate, but I might say living with climate and help especially community in order to be prepared and for us to mitigate the climate change impact. Okay, so and I am also sharing with you typical researchers. So typical researcher might have their niche area, and they might have their niche area, and they should grow with them. So for example, this is an analysis made by my friend, my colleague, Dr. Zulfaka. So he's also a really good climate researcher. So he made this graph for us in our center of IPASA. So what he did is, and many of us can do actually, we try to study ourselves. So for example, this is the growth of my research topic for me. So, for example, I can see from this kind of assessment, a researcher might develop their research areas and niche areas. So, for example, before I was in my early development, I have been involved a lot with, for example, problem exploitation. And then as we go on, we learn more, we identify more gaps, and we collaborate more with the industry, with the community. So, and then we develop ourselves example, in my case, I developed more for research related to risk, vulnerability, research more directly impacted to the community, and how we can contribute to the community, as well as the needs by the industry and governments. So this is just a typical example from me, but I'm sure a lot of local researcher in Malaysia as well are growing because of the opportunities that we have and also the exposure that we have, particularly related to climate. Okay, so these are just example. I'm just sharing with you some of my research directly related to climate change. So this is one project with the Department of Irrigation and Drainage on the Integrated Catchment Management Plan for Machap River Basin Project, Machap Dam actually. So we did some study on what climate change impact to that water resource, water availability. We compared with the demand in that area. So this is one of research. We might say a quadruplex also type of research. It is research. It is a consultancy project as well. And this is, for example, another very I think can be a high impact research as well, where we are involved with a consultant in order to see the climate change. The flood impact of this particular basin, which is in Sungai Batu Pahat in Johor. And we collaborate with the consultant to find out what are the mitigation measures suitable for this location. And many more. We have community, we do community services to the school children and also to the disaster or the disaster management agencies. So this is example that we did with the NGO Nadim. We visited, we try to collaborate with international platform as well through Japanese, Vietnam, and many more. So the idea is to get more information, to get more knowledge in order for us to serve back to the country. And also we share. If we are researcher, we are academic, we want to share. It doesn't. It might be quite meaningless if we don't share what we know. So we try to write as much as possible to the newspaper, to any public or social media as well. For example, we have a group. If you have time, please like our Facebook page. We shared a lot related to hydraulics, hydrology, and especially related to climate change impact. And so I think my last slide. So maybe it's not complete without sharing some quotes. For example, like Isaac Newton, what we know is a drop, what we don't know is an ocean. And from Albert Einstein, the important thing is not to stop questioning. Curiosity has its own reason for existence. And of course, if we looked into a scripture like the Quran, there's also verse like, indeed Allah will not change the condition of a people until they change what is in themselves. So lastly, I would like to say that researcher or academics, their role is bridging the gaps. We are a bridge. I can say I am a bridge. And we need to connect, we need to bridge the gaps, especially related to knowledge. We need to be more advanced. We try to catch new methods, learn in advance in order for us to help the industry and the community and many other sectors. So I think that's all from me. And feel free to contact me if you want to do some work or collaborate or have any questions. So thank you very much. Over to the moderator, Lieutenant Colonel Muhammad Syukri. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Eliza, for your kind of knowledge sharing. Now, as you mentioned that we need the collaboration among researchers, among other actors as well. So I hand over to YB Amira Aisya binti Abdul Aziz, who will share the local wisdom, how the local leaders could play their role in managing climate. Over to you, YB.
Thank you very much, Lieutenant Colonel. So sorry for the technical glitch just now. Yeah, thank you so much. It was very interesting sharing from Dr. Eliza just now. From my perspective, I'll be sharing about what can the local government, specifically because I'm a state legislative assembly woman, will be sharing about what the state government should do and what have we done from the Johor state government in terms of climate change. So I'll be sharing my presentation for a while. Okay. Okay. Can this be seen? So, all right. So as just to share, Johor has established a committee specifically to look into climate change and disaster management. I'll be sharing a lot more about why is this committee formed, what has it done, and what is my hope for Johor and also for Malaysia in terms of efforts to tackle climate change issues in our country and also in this region. So first of all, just a little bit of introduction. So this is just a little bit about me. But before we go further into that presentation, I think it's important to understand why is it when we talk about climate change, why is it not enough for just the federal government to make laws? So as you've known, federal government is made up of the parliamentarians, the Senate, but there are different jurisdictions in terms of what the federal level have to do in terms of the lawmaking and what can state government do in terms of lawmaking. And at federal level, of course, there are multiple national laws that can be done to tackle the issues of climate change. And recently, in I think in first quarter of 2025, the federal government will also propose a bill called the Climate Change Bill, or the RUU Climate Change. And this is a very huge step for Malaysia in tackling issues of climate change, right? And YB Nik Nazmi is the minister in charge of that particular effort. But it's also important for us to look into state level government and also local councils. Why is it? Because it's not enough for federal government to do all this alone, because in terms of state government, we also have our own jurisdictions that require us or that allow us to make laws in terms of climate change. For example, jurisdiction that falls under state government are things like land management, forestry, water management. These are all very important when we talk about climate change. For example, the issue of dam, the issue of water reservoir, water reservation, all this falls under state government. And then we also have to look at local council. Local government's responsibilities fall under the Local Government Act, and areas of influence that is extremely important when we talk about climate change is like urban planning, waste management, and also disaster response. So all these things require a concerted effort when we want to tackle climate change. And there's also need to be a strong coordination between federal level, state level, and local level when we talk about climate change, right? So what we have done in Johor, of course, different state has different things that they do when we talk about climate change. But in Johor recently, we formed our own specific committee in the Johor State Legislative Assembly called Climate Change and Disaster Management Committee. This is one of the only 4 committees in the State Legislative Assembly. As you've all known, and Dr. Eliza has touched about it a little bit just now, in the early 2023, early last year, there's a huge flood impacting Johorians, all across Johor. And this has displaced thousands of family members. This has caused billions of loss for the state. And the state government responded by proposing the establishment of this particular committee, and it was passed unanimously in the State Legislative Assembly, right? Be it government or opposition, we all voted for this committee to be passed because we see the importance of having a committee that is bipartisan to look into climate change, because it's not enough for climate change to be a one-party or a one-sided effort. And so the role of this climate change committee is to advise and monitor issues related to climate change and also disaster management. There was a lot of conversation whether or not we should also look into disaster management, or do we look into climate change only? But because we feel that these two things are very much interrelated, and so we put it under the same committee. So this is the functions of our committee. It is to review law and regulation related to climate change and flood disaster management. And by that, I meant laws and regulations in the state and not necessarily the federal level, to examine the initiatives taken to address climate change, to examine the effectiveness of the flood mitigation processes in Johor, and also examining other alternatives in addressing the issues of flash floods, stagnant floods, and recurring floods in specific areas. And we also need to examine solutions. So what we do in the committee is we need to look at all the different agencies in the state, under the state level, agencies such as the local councils as well. We look into different local councils and what they are doing to tackle issues of climate change. We look into how they are spending state budget in order to tackle issues of climate change. And we act as advisors if we think that there is a need for state to increase that particular budget, or there's a need for state to negotiate with the federal level to do different things and to increase budget to our state to improve climate action plan. And we also propose improvements that can be made by the departments and agencies concerned with climate change and flood-related matters. Just to share, so this is actually in my constituency. So my constituency is called Puteri Wangsa. Usually when people think about flooding, people will think that it happens in rural areas. People will think that it happens in places that are not in city center. But I think the huge flood that happened in Malaysia in 2021 has proved that flood can also affect very badly in urban areas as well, as we are seeing right now. Even in Kuala Lumpur, there's always flash floods every once in a while. The same thing happened in my constituency. So my constituency are largely urban, but we also have pockets of semi-urban, semi-rural areas. And in a year, these people, my constituents, have to face flash flood and sometimes, stagnant floods. Not as bad as Batu Pahat. Batu Pahat has faced stagnant floods for around 1 month to 2 months. But in my constituency, we faced stagnant floods for like 3 to 4 days. And this affected them in terms of they have to be displaced, flooding in schools as well. So schools have to close down. Students cannot go to school. Some of them have, property destruction, and it is also very dangerous in terms of health-wise as well. Especially for older people, it's difficult for us to sort of bring them out of their houses when flash floods hit, because it is very quick, very fast. And so this committee, we're also looking into not just stagnant flood, we're also looking at how to solve flash flood. And that is the reason why it's important for state government and local council to also be involved when we talk about climate change, because urban planning is one of the most important thing when we talk about disaster management disaster management and risk management, and also about climate change and climate action plan as well. So I'm just going to share a little bit about what Johor has done specifically, and specifically on the Johor Climate Change and Disaster Management Committee, because I think that we've made quite a big leap of effort in terms of establishing this committee, which is multi-partisan, to show the commitment of all the parties in the Johor Climate Change, in the Johor State Legislative Assembly. We've also had our official visit to Singapore. So some might ask, why do we go to Singapore? Because of what I've shared just now. I think one of the worst thing is about the flash floods in the urban area, because we can predict, for example, the stagnant floods that happen in rural areas, because it's very much dependent on, rainfall, and also whether or not there'll be, in terms of the water level for the rivers, the water level in terms of and monsoon changes. So stagnant floods are much easier to predict in comparison to flash floods. So flash floods can even happen during monsoon and not just during the change of monsoon, like what happened in terms of in the rural areas. And so we have to look into what can we do to tackle flash floods as well. And based on those, the visit that we had in Singapore, we've learned several best practices from Singapore, as shown in the slides here. Of course, one of the most important things is that new development projects must have water storage tanks or retention ponds. We already have that law in place. However, sadly, I have to share here that there are ways and there are loopholes that irresponsible developers have been using to not have water storage tanks or to not build water storage tanks or retention ponds when they establish new development. And so we've continuously, for example, myself and also other state legislative assemblymen and assemblywomen in Johor have consistently pushed the government to relook at that particular procedure, to relook at that particular law, because there's a need for us to ensure that we close that loophole so that developers, irresponsible developers, don't try to just wiggle their way out of having to build retention ponds, because that will not just affect that particular development that they're building, but it will also affect other areas surrounding that development. We also look at what Singapore has done after the huge Orchard Road flash flood, is that they use self-flood barriers to reduce flood water for entering residential and economic areas. And these are something that is being owned by the house owners themselves, by the business owners themselves, and it's very easy for them to just put up that self-flood barriers. It will not be effective to avoid very heavy flood, but at least for flash flood, it can somehow minimize the impact of flash flood. They increase the height limit of pedestrian pathways in high-risk areas such as MRT stations and shopping malls. So if any one of you have ever been to Singapore or will have the opportunity to go to Singapore, you can see that before going into the MRT stations, the pathways are the height is a bit it's like a lope, and it's a bit high. That is because they want to stop the water spillage into going into MRT stations. And I think this is something that we should really look into in terms of the urban spaces in Malaysia. The use of drones and remote controlled trash trap boats to manage the environment. Again, these are technologies that we should be investing in, and building a strong wall along the riverbanks using the Lego concept to prevent flood and coastal erosion. So this is understanding that there's a need for countries like Singapore to build their own strong wall. But of course, when we look at our own geography in Malaysia, when we look at our own resources, we actually have natural strong wall in terms of our own our trees, in terms of multiple things in Malaysia that can assist us. Sorry, I saw a hand raised. Is it from Lieutenant Colonel? Did you just raise your hand?
Yeah, you have another 2 minutes, maybe.
Okay, sorry. Thank you so much. Sometimes I get very carried away when I talk about this issue. But yeah, so because of that 2 minutes, I think I'll just skip a little bit. So these are the challenges of flood management. I think this happened in multiple places as well. But what I want to share is that we have given 10 recommendations to Johor State Government, and all these recommendations have been included in the Johor 2024 state budget. So I think this is something that all state governments can do, is to establish a committee that is multi-partisan to look into climate change, that can coordinate the efforts of climate change between agencies in our state itself. And as I've mentioned just now, is that we're also in the midst of proposing a National Climate Change Act. And I have submitted an email to the minister, and also to the consultation paper in terms of National Climate Change Act. And these are the things that I recommended for the minister to include when we talk about Climate Change Act in Malaysia, which is we need to strengthen Malaysia's climate financing mechanism, because we cannot be continuously using finances issues to say that we don't have enough finance to do a certain thing to tackle climate change. We need to introduce mandatory climate budget tagging so that there's transparency and accountability in terms of climate action plan. We need to strengthen institutional actions to climate change. And in this, I propose to establish an independent committee or independent body to look into our climate change plan. Regulation of carbon markets and trading, increasing accountability in carbon projects. Again, carbon projects must answer to the independent commission so that there is no such thing as misuse of power or corruption when we talk about climate change, because this is something that's very serious to take care of Malaysia and to take care of the future of our Mother Earth, and enhancing national and state government coordination. I think this is particularly extremely important because, again, as I mentioned, national has different jurisdiction, state has different jurisdiction, and we need to coordinate these two jurisdictions if we want to tackle climate change issues. So I think I will stop here. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share about what are the jurisdictions in the Johor or in the state level jurisdiction, and also what we have done in the Johor Climate Change Committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Yang Berhormat. Actually, I kind of eager because the local spirits from legislation assembly members and everybody who participate in within disaster risk management and also the climate change action within the local, it seems like the local leadership is very important, that you can influence the local community to participate within this kind of strategies and initiatives locally. So now we're going to move to Ms. Wong Yun Chiu. Ms. Wong Yun Chiu is from the Malaysia Youth Delegation for the Means of Implementation and Support Working Group Coordinator. So Ms. Chiu, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lieutenant. Give me 1 second to share my screen. Great. So good morning, everyone. My name is Q, and I am from Malaysian Youth Delegation. So for those of you who don't know, the Malaysian Youth Delegation is a volunteer-run civil society organization. We're entirely youth-led, and we've been around since 2015. The main focus of MYD is we want to really advocate for climate policy within the regional, national, international space. And to do that, we have a two-part role to play. The second part is to be able to build up to the first role that I mentioned earlier. We need to first raise awareness of climate policy among Malaysian youths. So how do we do that? When we first started out, this started as a group of young, passionate Malaysians who just really wanted to go to COP and get our voices heard. But over 10 years, we've started realizing that to do so, we really need to fine-tune how we work and be able to build up that significant knowledge that you carry in order to actually make your visits to COP worthwhile and not be coined as COP tourism. And so in 2024, when we sat down and look at our vision again, number one, we wanted to build youth experts in the local and international climate policy and diplomacy space. And to do that, you have to run through a series of activities, including capacity building, lots of research, writing articles, which I would then go into later. And following having the capacity building, you would then be able to have youths represent Malaysia at regional and international climate conferences. And finally, going up to another bigger picture, be able to then use all of these takeaways after you've attended all these conferences to build partnerships within the local and regional space to encourage a whole society approach. So first things first, how do we get there? We run many series of capacity building sessions. So this includes having our previous youth delegates who have attended COP follow a lot of negotiation tracks and understand where the policy is heading to. So have them coming to give new members that sort of capacity building, directing them into where to look into. This year, we structured our working groups according to the thematic areas of UNFCCC, so mitigation, adaptation, implementation and support, as well as mobilization. After running these capacity building sessions, if our members desire to explore or deep dive into really specific areas, we will then either invite external speakers to come in and give that talk or open up the capacity building to the public so that our members get to train themselves and also build their confidence in this area. So for example, some external speakers that we've invited this year included Syukri from Narae, as well as a speaker from the Perspectives Climate Research Group who talked about the new collective quantified goal in climate finance. And after all of these capacity building sessions, they will then deep dive and write articles. So you can see on the screen in the past, we've talked about effects of water pollution and also adaptation in climate change. And following that, we have a media post that we then post to the public. I would like to draw your attention here to the bottom right. COP29 is happening right now. So if you would like to have a crash course on the main negotiation tracks that are happening, please do look at our media posts. The handle is at MYD Climate. We also talk about a series of other things and use our social media channels to gather inputs from the public, which feeds into surveys, as well as a national youth statement. And where does this national youth statement come into play? So this year especially, we have issued out a survey sometime in the month of August or September, if I'm not mistaken, where we got the youth's public opinions on different topics, including mitigation, resilience, adaptation, biodiversity, climate finance, carbon markets, etc. This is then distilled into a series of recommendations under all of these thematic areas. We then host a local conference of youth where you invite external speakers, come in for 2 days, talk about various topics, and have youths kind of like really go through like a 2 days crash course, so to speak. And at the end of this 2 day session, the results of the survey that we mentioned earlier is then tabled for discussion. So we have different breakout groups. Youths are kind of split into whatever areas that they care about the most, and they look at all of these recommendations that come through the survey, and they add on based on their own personal opinions, based on what they've heard from the speakers from the past 2 days. And this becomes a really solid document that our internal working groups then take back and distill further to produce a document that we call National Youth Statement. This National Youth Statement is channeled into 2 main channels. The first one is the Global Youth Statement. So MYD is part of YOUNGO, which is the official youth constituency of the UNFCCC. And the YOUNGO gathers all of these national youth statements from various countries every single year and put this into a global youth statement, which is presented during COP. So that's the first channel where the national level statement is taken into a global youth statement. The second channel is we then present this to our ministry and local governments, especially when we attend COP, which brings me to my next slide. MYD has representation at UNFCCC conferences, mainly at the 2 main ones, the intersessionals that are held in Bonn in June, as well as year-end at COP. During these sessions, we have bilateral meetings with the Malaysian government, as well as other civil society organizations. We network with other CSOs from Hong Kong, from Singapore, trying to understand how we can collaborate as youths, really upskilling all of the different areas and where we can have synergies to bring our momentum forward. And the National Youth Statement document that I talked about earlier, that would then also be discussed during these bilateral meetings. And the reason why we do this, even though a lot of people ask us, you're youths, you work a lot at the grassroots level. That's the perception of where youths can contribute the most. But what we would like to highlight is that over the past 10 years of observation, a lot of the work that goes behind the scenes, when you work a lot at the grassroots level, you tend to touch a lot of sensitive topics. And I believe when we had a meeting with Lieutenant last time, the focal points, Kieran and Kaisin pointed this out, which is that if you touch a lot on sensitive areas, that is where a lot of clashes come with the government. And that's not to say that these discussions are not good, but in the long term, you have to be diplomatic and be able to discuss and give really constructive recommendations. And that is where we find we can leverage our influence at. So at UNFCCC, we gather and have all of these discussions. And after that, we then distill this into our pre and post COP reports. So last year, after COP28, we had a post-COP forum that happened in collaboration with SCPH, Southeast Center for Planetary Health, as well as the other organizations that you can see here, including UNDP, UNICEF, ALAM, as well as the European Union. For this specific event is when we try to take it up a further level. So instead of focusing just on youths, we take the youth feedback that we've gathered from all of these events that we've attended, we've organized, and as well as our internal members. And then at post-COP forum, we invite all of these experts from civil society organizations, from academia, such as what Dr. Eliza mentioned earlier, and also local governments. And from there, we have a very focused discussion on what exactly happened at COP, at all these different negotiations. And then we try to distill into what can we do for the next year moving forward. There were breakout sessions that were held, facilitated by subject matter experts. And from there, this became the post-COP forum that you see, post-COP forum reports that you see on the screen right here. So at the end of the day, what MYD tries to do is really leverage all of these different connections that we have built up over the years. We upskill our members year on year so that we have youth delegates who are representative at COP. And then from there, have really strong connections and synergize from regional to international level and try to make our voices elevated. And if you are interested in joining MYD, we always have a recruitment drive at the beginning of the year, every single year. Feel free to reach out to us on our social media channels. And now I would move on to the next part of my presentation, which is where are youths in the picture? I've talked very specifically about MYD, but I would also love you to be inspired and take away from this session and understand that where are the other avenues or methods that you can actually involve youths in your climate action. So these 5 roles that I'm showing here on the screen was actually distilled by the Adaptation Fund. They produced a report after they've done a study looking at all of their portfolio projects and understanding where the youths play a role specifically in climate resilience projects. So I think what a lot of you guys are familiar with are the builders. The builders are basically youths who take hands-on action. So physically, hands-on, go onto the ground and react. And in Malaysia, this is most prominent in flooding reliefs. Second and third, knowledge brokers and community guardians. These are pretty interconnected. So you disseminate knowledge about climate change adaptation concepts to youths. They take that back to their respective communities. They are very familiar with their communities and they're able to convene them towards a common goal. And then from there, the 4th and the 5th, which is the social entrepreneurship, as well as the change makers, are also interconnected. So you can see that it's going up another layer above. When youths are inspired, you have facilities like startups, accelerators, innovation facilities. This is where they are able to develop and scale up adaptation ideas. And they have a lot of time and resources and energy to pour into all of this. And from there, you develop social entrepreneurs who then question the status quo. They question the original laws and tradition, and they really push to make a positive change in the communities, which results in the change maker. And now I would like to take you through some case studies that we've seen. The builders over here, I think, again, mentioning 2021 December floods, which YB Amira also touched on earlier. A lot of you are familiar with the scale and the impact. About 130,000 people were affected, and the estimated financial loss was around 20 billion ringgit. This did not include intangible value items such as cultural or sentimental values and any long-term effects such as diseases or mental health effects. And so what really emerged out of this is there was a very significant flood relief, the largest private flood relief effort, the Gudwara Sahib PJ. They are actually very accustomed to youth-led activities. They have a youth camp every single year. And from there, they took it. And when they personally experienced the flood effects, because what really started out for them was a personal experience. They wanted to go and save their holy scripture in the temple, went there and saw how disastrous the flood was having on the surrounding communities. And from there, it became a mass movement where a lot of people started gathering, helping out with sourcing, packing, and transporting relief to victims or rescuing stranded victims. And what I really wanted you to take away from this case study is that because it was youth-led, they were able to break apart the traditional, conventional mindset of how flood relief should be. They focus on 3 things: volunteer, autonomy, and trust. What became maximum trust was involving the power of youths and volunteers and civil society organizations and really be able to build community resilience by banding together. The second case study that I would like to take you through is the youth role in being knowledge brokers and community guardians. I really liked this example of this community in Chile, specifically a region called O'Higgins. They were already affected by water scarcity and soil degradation. And because of that, the Adaptation Fund gave them funds to foster a project that specifies that they have to focus on agriculture education. So the youths, what they did was they did a series of workshops, 8 workshops on climate change and its effect on rain-fed agriculture for all the teachers and students in these rural schools and colleges. They also trained the students on water harvesting techniques and agroclimatology in 3 different rural schools. And from there, what actually happened was quite interesting. This project actually started out in 2018, and a lot of youths were actually migrated from these rural farm communities to cities to look for better jobs, better working conditions, better economic prospects. And as all of you know, COVID-19 happened, and all of these youths then had to stay home in their communities. And this led them to unexpectedly engage in the Adaptation Fund project. And they started to take ownership. They decided to disseminate this information, become more involved with the project, and really be the kind of like caretaker for making sure that agriculture in these rural communities were transforming into this new form of climate smart agriculture format. And I think I'm running out of time, but the second example over here is also local. It's in Malaysia, where they have a training of trainers to improve geological disasters resilience. This is following the 2022 Bukit Permai event, where a lot of landslides were happening. And if you're familiar with a UKM institution called CPRI, they developed this model of training the trainers, where you had a total of 46 indigenous school teachers coming together, as well as 400 students participating in this experiential learning program. And in this photo over here in the bottom right, you can see it's just constructing a slope using sand, clay, and pebbles. And from there, the teachers really understand better how geological disasters happen, what were their cascading impacts, and then they were able to kind of like spread throughout the community and raise awareness on that. And my final slide is just to draw attention that social entrepreneurs play a huge role in this. And from here, if you're familiar with Dr. Jaaffar's work, she has done a lot of work with research in this My Bahaya platform, leveraging GIS, what we call public participatory GIS platform, where you can then log in snagged photos of incidents and photos, and then upload this onto this website. And these are all the areas that you can involve youths and really inspire them to take further action. With that, I hand it back to you, Lieutenant. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Yang Muhammad, YB, Amira, Aisya, Dr. Eliza, and Wong for your sharing session. Sorry, we have a very limited timing, but within this very limited timing, we left a very big questions. How we can get everybody involved and unified within this initiative in combating climate, especially at the local level. So I believe this is a very intriguing session we have today. And I would like to conclude that the importance of local vulnerabilities and fostering innovative solutions among state and local governments, which we can help to build more sustainable and climate resilient Malaysia, especially in dealing with the future environmental or climate challenges. And thank you again for all the panelists, and hope that we can collaborate further in making Malaysia as a sustainable development country. With that, I conclude the session for this morning. Thank you very much as well. So I hand back over to Avicenna. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for the great discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, before we proceed, please take a moment to scan the QR code for our survey. Your feedback will be very helpful for us to enhance your experience at future events. Now, it is my privilege to introduce our next session for the day, which gives an update on the latest carbon market developments for COP29, presented by Dr. Wayne Chen, Head of Carbon Market for Bursa Malaysia. Over to you, Dr. Wayne.
Hi, good morning. This is Wayne here from Bursa, Malaysia. And first of all, I'd like to thank CGM for giving me this opportunity to share with you about the updates on COP29. So as you can see, this is actually recorded live at the Blue Zone Pavilion, the Delegation Pavilion. And I'm really very honored to bring you an update. This is a video recording. I'm unable to wake up so early on the 20th to give you the the update. So I'm doing this recording on the day before. So it is actually now the 19th of November, and the time here is around 1 p.m. So I'm just going to give you, I'm just going to share my screen for now. And I'm just going to put it on a full screen mode. So this particular presentation is basically to give you an update on what's happening to the COP29 so far, and just focusing on the carbon market. So this particular first slide here basically shows that, as far as the whole conversation about Article 6, which is a international compliance mechanism, and also the VCM, which is a voluntary carbon market, there appears to be a convergence of both markets. And in fact, independent carbon standards, they are actively adjusting their programs to align with the country's participation in Article 6, and with the recent announcement by Singapore, Verra and Gold Standard, they launched their Article 6 crediting program to guide and to harmonize how government can build an independent crediting programs to implement the cooperative approach, which is under the Article 6.2 of the Paris Agreement. So there are some key announcements following the first week of COP29. And firstly, we must acknowledge that Singapore is really very much in the forefront when it comes to the Article 6, championing the Article 6. And Singapore has actually announced that they are actually providing grants for local project developers to support the development, at least, of the PDD documents and feasibility studies relating, of course, to the Article 6 projects. And very importantly, the ICVCM, which is a meta standard provider for the supply sides of the carbon projects, they approved 3 of the RED+ methodologies, as you can see on the presentation slide here. Now, just very quickly, just to pivot to you on the picture on the top right-hand corner at the entrance of the COP29. These are just some trivial information. Actually, those colorful panels that you can see, basically, they are actually made up of solar panels altogether. And these are actually glass solar PV, and the total capacity is around 16 kilowatt. So in as much as Azerbaijan is largely an oil and gas country, in fact 90% of their electricity is powered by natural gas, they are also trying to pivot to the best to the renewable energy. And the picture at the bottom here is the picture of the blue zone, a picture of the night scene. Now, moving on again to updates on the COP29. In fact, the COP29 has been very much touted as a finance COP, or some call it as a money COP. And I think the big conversation here is that according to some bodies that claim that the 100 billion, which was actually requested for, has already been fulfilled. And under the NCQG, they are looking for, negotiating for around probably at least $1 trillion to $1.3 trillion annual fund that is required to help developing countries and the lesser developed countries with their mitigation as well as the adaptation plan. And as you can see from the first point here, the expert panels, they really estimate that the world requires between 6.3 to 6.7 trillion by 2030 for the climate actions. And up to 200 billion in climate fund could possibly come from the unconventional sources, such as the levies on shipping, aviation, and also carbon market. In fact, the UNFCCC Executive Secretary Simon Steele and the Azerbaijani lead negotiator, won't try to attempt to pronounce his name. They've actually highlighted that trading under the Article 6 could unlock savings of up to 250 billion annually in the emissions abatement cost. In fact, I'm just very encouraged. I actually watched the opening of the COP29, and the presidential lead for the COP29 mentioned that the Article 6 is a very important agenda that they would like to see it being pushed through for this particular COP. Now, according to a report from the Climate Finance in Asia, the climate finance still remains a rather substantial gap, and it does require an increased private sector participation. In fact, private climate finance account, according to the report, 39% of the total climate finance in East Asia and Pacific. And to address this gap in Asia and Pacific, the private sector's share in the climate finance needs to rise up to 90% by 2030. So this is an interesting point, because later on in my presentation slide, I also want to share with you that we actually have a forum dedicated to discussing about financing carbon projects, especially within the ASEAN region. So how can the carbon market help? Well, there has been really quite good progress on Article 6.4 for this particular COP, but also importantly to note that under the Article 6.4, and if you're not very familiar about the Article 6.4, it is similar to a CDM mechanism, and it has a new name. It is now called the Paris Agreement Crediting Mechanism. Now, the PACM, they are really perceived to be of a higher quality due to the more stringent environmental integrity and the safeguards. And it is expected that credits that are coming from the 6.4 should be able to fetch a premium price for the carbon credits. But no significant price increase has been observed since their adoption by the CMA so far. Now, according to the IETA survey, the IETA is the International Emissions Trading Association. They have conducted a survey, and 83% of their respondents mentioned that they are willing to pay a higher price for compared to the average market rates for correspondingly adjust ITMOs. Now, just to clarify with you that the ITMOs refers to transfer of carbon credits from one country's NDC to another country. So corresponding adjustment would basically require that if you are a supplier country, then if you sell the carbon credits, you will have to add back the emissions to your own national GHG inventory. And similarly, if you are a buyer country, then you can reduce your emissions corresponding to the amount that you have purchased from the host country. Now, there is also a growing consensus on the need to develop, of course, high quality carbon projects that can command the premium price rather than pursuing the cheap or low quality projects. Cheap and low quality projects. Now, this particular slide also gives some key updates on the various articles under various clauses under the Article 6. Now, 6.2 really refers to the cooperative approach between countries to countries, and it also covers the OIMP, which includes such as the CORSIA compliances. Now, under the 6.2 discussion, it's been quite challenging, but there are some, I'm not going to jinx it, the negotiation is not over, but so far the Substar has actually recommended a draft conclusion for Article 6.2, which will be forwarded to the CMA for further discussion. And the CMA is expected to present a clean text around this time already, and the negotiations are still ongoing. Now, 6.4 saw a better light. Actually, by the first day of COP, the CMA has already endorsed the standards and methodologies and removals with regards to the Article 6.4. And this endorsement was really very positive. It brought a lot of positive vibes to the COP. And on the 6.8, this also received quite a positive outcome. Yesterday, the CMA actually adopted the work program under the Article 6.8. And by the way, just to let you know that the 6.8 focuses on the non-market approaches to sustainable development and climate action. Now, of course, every COP presents its own challenges. COP28, we felt to reach an agreement, and all parties this time round, they were willing to see how we can bring it forward. And there are still discussions underway with regards to operationalizing 6.2. And these are all the issues. Sorry, I won't say these are all the issues, but these are some of the issues that are still being debated. And some of these issues relates to information that will be required to be included in the initial reporting. A key issue that remains debated is about the revocation of authorizations of the emissions reduction, how the international registry should be structured, with the EU advocating for a centralized registry, whereas the US supporting a decentralized approach. Now, of course, there are also other concerns relates to the, especially for market players and independent standard organizations that are concerned about the regulatory risk in case countries decided to opt for, allowing the revocation of the authorization. And also, of course, the current text permits revocation only for credits that have not been first transferred and requires agreement by both parties under specific terms and conditions. And NGOs have also expressed the need for revocation to be applied in cases if it involves human rights infringement. Now, from a developing country's perspective, I think all parties agree that maintaining the integrity of the mechanism would be of most importance. And developing countries have also raised a concern that, some of those rules that were actually expressed were overly complicated and they do not have the capability to actually, fully understand the implications. And this potentially could hinder their participation in the Article 6 discussion. So therefore, they are asking for a more balanced approach that could actually ensure that environment integrity is actually and accessibility for all countries are being emphasized. So I'm going to now move on very quickly to provide an update from the Malaysians' perspective on the carbon market, what has happened. And maybe by now, some of you may be aware that, yesterday there has been some news on the memorandum of collaboration that was announced. And basically, this memorandum of collaboration is to support the operationalizing of the ASEAN Common Carbon Framework. And this particular framework is actually an initiative proposed by the Working Group on Carbon Market under the ASEAN Business Advisory Council of Malaysia. And this is very significant because Malaysia is taking over the chairmanship of ASEAN in 2025. So this particular collaborations is among 5 different associations from Singapore, one from Singapore, one from Thailand, 2 from Indonesia, and of course, 1 from Malaysia. And the different associations are actually listed down in the logo here. And as you can see on the left-hand side of the slide, the collaboration basically wants to operationalize the ASEAN Common Carbon Framework. And the ASEAN Common Carbon Framework is to help realize the ASEAN strategy for carbon neutrality. The ASEAN strategy for carbon neutrality was actually endorsed when Indonesia was chair of the ASEAN last year in 2023. And this year, of course, Laos is the holding the chairmanship, and Malaysia will be having that chairmanship from next year onwards. Now, I won't go through the entire scope of collaboration, but the main gist of the collaboration is to address 2 parts. One, on the supply of the carbon credits within this particular region. And the second part is to address the market, especially an interoperable market that would help to enlarge and aggregate and otherwise a very fragmented carbon market in the ASEAN region. So this particular works, of course, has been in the discussion for the last 3 months since the Malaysian Carbon Market Association was actually launched in Bursa Malaysia's second Malaysia Carbon Market Forum on the 8th of August. So it took us 3 months to complete that negotiations among 5 carbon market associations to agree on the scope of works. And yesterday, we are very pleased that our minister, YB Nik Nazmi, came to the MOC exchange ceremony, and he actually gave his endorsement and support for the memorandum of collaboration. And of course, this ASEAN Common Carbon Framework, YB Nik Nazmi is very supportive of that as well. In that particular same exchange ceremony, the PERMSEC of Singapore's Ministry of Environmental and Sustainability, His Excellency Stanley Law was there as well to give his speech as well to support this particular framework. And as some of you might have seen on my LinkedIn post, at one stage it almost seems impossible, but now we do realize that it's always impossible until it is done. So this particular memorandum of collaboration will span over 2 years, and we are very excited to see how this conversation will pan over these particular 5 associations. I think the big discussion is whether are we limiting ourselves to only these 5 associations. The answer is, of course, not. These 5 associations was actually chosen just because we couldn't find any other carbon market associations in other ASEAN countries. But if there are, then of course these associations are most welcome to also join as well. And immediately after the immediately after the MOC exchange was over, there was a panel discussion among the signatory parties of the MOC. And there was a panel discussion that was actually moderated by Janet Harlows, who is actually from the Carbon Market Institute. And these are the sharings of the key findings of the panel discussion. And I think everyone is actually agreeing that there is been a lot of talk, but we do want to see, hopefully, within the 2 years of this particular memorandum of collaboration, we must see some credible and high quality carbon projects that's been mooted out from this particular ASEAN region. And we also agree that talent pools are very much in scarcity. So therefore, we need to create that talent pool of resources. We do acknowledge that certain ASEAN countries are much more advanced in carbon market compared to the others. For example, Indonesia and Thailand, in terms of developing carbon projects, they are well ahead of the curve. They even have their own national crediting scheme, whereas Malaysia is only at the very early cusp of actually developing ours through the works of the Malaysia Forest Fund, the MFF, on their FCO carbon standards. And moving on very quickly on the financing part, which I promised to mention a little bit earlier. And this particular financing panel session was actually jointly curated between CIMB and Bursa Malaysia. CIMB and Bursa Malaysia had a memorandum of collaboration signed a year ago during the Cooler Earth Summit. And this particular memorandum of collaboration is also trying to see how we can develop the ecosystem. And because Malaysia is taking over the ASEAN chairmanship, we want to see how we can actually create innovative financing to support more carbon projects within this particular ASEAN region. And in this particular platform, we are very pleased to have actually ADB on board with us, and also, of course, AITA and Mark Campbell from the BCMI to provide an international perspective on where they view the carbon markets are heading to. And of course, we also have Edward Ramsey from Permian Global. And it is very significant to have him on board because Bursa Malaysia, we just recently auctioned their first of the Malaysian carbon credits from their Kuamut project located in Sabah. And of course, part of BCX, our aspiration is not just to operate the BCX, but also to develop a vibrant ecosystem. So these are some of the key takeaways. The key thing is always, of course, the market demand is very, very important. And one of the key market demand is on the Article 6. And on this note, I would like to also echo what YB Nick Nasmi mentioned during the opening or during the MOC exchange. He updated to inform that Malaysia is developing our national policy on carbon market. And among one of the elements that are looking in this particular national policy on the climate on this national policy on the carbon market is the national arrangement on the Article 6. So this Article 6, we would imagine that it would spawn off quite a fair bit of a demand, together with, of course, local demands from the domestic compliance mechanism. And of course, the role of a government is very important. The conversation actually shows that policy risk is going to be very high. Therefore, the government needs to provide an assurance that if projects are actually implemented, there will be no forms of backpedaling or curtailment from the government on what the developers can do with the carbon projects. Cash flow is, of course, very important for the bankability of the carbon projects. You know, it has been actually, it's probably very well known that if you are operating in a voluntary carbon market, you know, in order to secure financing, and a firm off-taker would be really required to actually provide that assurance of a cash flow. But if you do have a compliance mechanism that is already in place that spells out clearly what are the carbon projects that are eligible, what are the eligible carbon credits that can be used in the compliance mechanism, this kind of eligibility criteria can provide an assurance on the demand, and in terms and in turn attract some climate financing into these particular projects. Now, in terms of financing, blended financing with concessionaire capital from MDBs are very important. That is why today we have the ADB on the platform to provide that discussion with us. And of course, finally, the discussion also concluded again that the need to develop a competent pool of resources making up of those BVBs, carbon project developers, and also consultants to ensure that there are high quality carbon projects available in the country. So I think on this note, I've mentioned quite a fair bit already. My time given to me is only 20 minutes and I've already gone beyond the 20 minutes. And on this note, I would like to thank everyone for listening in, and wishing you all the best for year end is coming to an end already. We hope to see you all again, another update at COP30, which will be held in Brazil. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.
Thank you, Dr. Wei Chen, for your insights. We are now ready to move on to our second and final panel today. Curated by the Institute of Corporate Directors Malaysia, this session will feature a dynamic discussion on the topic, Role of the Board, Climate Resilience, How do we adapt? We look forward to an engaging exchange of ideas and perspectives with Esther Ann, Chief Sustainability Officer, City Developments, Valentino Bagatsing, Independent Director of Apex Mining Company Incorporated and Una Insurance Corporation, as well as Chairman and CEO of Investment and Capital Corporation of the Philippines, or ICCP. Architect Ahila Ganesan, Independent Non-Executive Director for Velisto Energy, as well as the founder of FutureLink. Also, Dr. Kalaniti Nesaratnam, Independent Non-Executive Director of various Malaysian publicly listed companies. And this session will be moderated by Michelle Kaivlet, President and Chief Executive Officer of ICDM. Over to you, Michelle.
Thank you, Avi. Good morning, everyone. Good morning to all our panelists here. Good morning to everyone joining us online, as well as those from Baku, and afternoon to those joining us later from Baku. Thank you all, Valentino, Kala, Esther, Ahila, for joining us on this panel. To everyone, we've got these esteemed board members from around the region. We've invited them from the ASEAN region. So we're very, very happy and thankful that they've managed to join us today. Esther, I believe, is in Baku itself. Thank you again. And we're going to talk about, as what Avi mentioned, climate resilience and the role of the board in that. So obviously, we're going to talk about the resilience of the companies on whom they sit on, and they could also give us their general views overall on the corporate sector itself, on how board members lead their companies and provide that oversight to adapt to the climate changes that we've been seeing recently. Now, you would have seen obviously natural disasters, etc., flooding, hurricanes, typhoons, all impacting many of us. And therefore, climate resilience becomes all the more crucial, and the role of the four members here as well, all the more crucial in terms of leading their companies towards that resilience. Now, we're going to talk about many things and methods by which we're going to address climate resilience within their companies. This could cover innovation. It could cover obviously risk management. It also covers the vulnerabilities that each of your companies face. I will start the session now, and thank you, Abi, for introducing everyone. So I'll go straight into this. Perhaps a little round robin question, and perhaps I'll do this alphabetically. So we'll have Ahila, Esther, Carla, and then Valentino. So suppose ladies first, and Valentino, you're adding to our diversity this morning.
Oh, thank you.
ally.
Privileged to be here.
And just for the audience as well, we've got a very varied background here. I mean, Ahila is an architect by profession. She's been in urban development, urban sustainability. Esther as well in real estate, but working for a multinational in Singapore for a long time. Carla, well, we've known Carla for a while as well, and she brings with her a lot of experience in sustainability. She's part of the CGM, also in plantations as such, and oil palm. And Valentino, of course, in mining and from the Philippines joining us. So thank you all. Now, climate resilience. We're talking about this top priority for boards, locally, globally, regionally. Now, to Ahila first, how do you define climate resilience and climate expertise at the board level? Now, you're in sustainability and you talk a lot about this. How do you define this at the board level?
Hi, thank you for having me, firstly, to CGM as well as to COP at this moment in time. Essentially, when you look at this expertise, I think the key thing is knowledge is important, and you need to acknowledge that there is an issue. I think that is important. Knowledge is important, but more than that, right? More than having a deep understanding about climate science, which is something that anybody could read up on, right? You don't have to be a climate scientist for that. You have to be someone who is interested to know more, especially the differences between adaptation, between mitigation, adaptation, and as well as what a company's role is in the entire ecosystem. I think the most important thing as far as a board is concerned is the delivery of that information during your board meetings. Because sometimes it's not how much you know, it's how you say it and how you influence the decision making. And I think that is the key thing here, because if you go off on a very scientific tangent, I think you lose people. You'll lose people. And at the end of the day, you can't deny that business is going to be front and center. Making money is going to be front and center. So how do you package it nicely that you push them along in the direction you want them to go, while sticking to your core beliefs as well as the science behind it? I think knowledge is important, yes, but the delivery and how you influence the people on the board, that is probably a better way to approach it.
Thank you, Ahila, and I'll pause you there. And I'm glad you mentioned this about profitability. Now, coming on this topic, boards battle with that. Profitability versus sustainability, short term versus long term. Of course, profitability is also long term, but do you invest? Is sustainability a cost? Esther,
Yes.
in the real estate space as well that you are in, what is the most urgent responsibility that you see on your board, for example, when it comes to building climate resilience? And I will just mention as well, when Ahila talked about knowledge, we do our ASEAN Board Trend Survey at ICDM every 2 years, and we found that the 2024 survey showed that boards in ASEAN were lacking in terms of sustainability capability and competence. This was highlighted by their own management, so we got feedback from management as well. So your views on what is the most urgent responsibility of boards?
Hello and good morning from Baku. It's actually 7 a.m. now, and really glad to join in starting so early. But very happy to be joining you all, and I've been listening out. And sustainability today actually includes very important, which is climate resilience. And when we talk about sustainability, it's not just about climate or environment. We also talk about social sustainability as well as economic sustainability. As a listed company, we have the obligation to maintain profitable and return value to our investors, stakeholders, and even our own employees and the supply chain and so on and so forth. If your company cannot maintain profitable, the first people who will suffer is actually who will lose the job, or you lose the business in your supply chain. So the triple bottom line has always been our, very fundamental to our business for almost 3 decades now. That is to, maintain profitable, not at the expense of the planet and the people. And when you talk about defining the, climate and also responsibility of the board or management, and it's almost the same, because we need to share the same North Star, that is to drive towards net zero and low carbon and sustainable future for all. And of course, when you talk about responsibility, who is acting on what, of course, there is a difference. And for all other business matter, the board play a very important strategic and leadership role. Sustainability, ESG, will not be effective if it is working in silo. And the first thing is about the whole corporate governance structure. And for CDL, I'm very fortunate that, for sustainability, I've always been reporting to, the CEO level, as well as, the board sustainability committee. And before 2014, it was named as CSR and corporate governance committee. So that means we have the years of the strategic level. And we know that actually even all over the world also, some of the so-called sustainability officer only report to through, either the HR, the risk committee, or, even public relations or marketing. So I think sustainability today is really mainstream. And I actually have the honors to have started the journey with CDL, which is actually a headquarter in Singapore, but we operate in 29 countries and region in the building sector. So we actually started quite early, and we look at integration, whether it is the board level or management level, vertically from the board of director to top management, mid management to rank and file, and horizontally cutting across all business and operational units. So we are sharing the same responsibility when it comes to climate action and also sustainability strategy. I can elaborate a little bit more. Yeah,
thank you for that. So Esther, obviously, who is a practitioner herself and coming from management, I guess. Thank you for sharing that governance structure. Kala, your views now on the role of the board, how has that changed over the years, and especially in terms of climate resilience?
Sure. Thank you, Michelle, and good morning, everyone. So I think I'm going to, since you said CGM, I'd like to also, if there's time, share the CGM experience. But let me start with my experience at the board level in IOI. I chaired the board sustainability committee at IOI, but Even before I joined IOI, this was 3 years ago, IOI had already started their climate action plan way back in 2019. And they were actually using their baseline data was 2015. So I think they were way ahead of everyone else. And the goal was to reduce emissions by 40% in 2025. But this year, we've already achieved that target. And in 2023, we announced our net zero targets. And we went with the gold standard, which is SBTI, the Science Based Target Initiative. And because we are agriculture based, we went with SBTI flag. Flag stands for forest, land, and agriculture. Our target is net zero by 2040, but of course, we have our midterm and short term goals too. With SBTI, we've done our scenario planning for 1.5 degree rise in temperature, and we've identified the physical risks to be heat wave, flooding, and rising sea levels as being the biggest concern. As far as flooding is concerned, we are already being hit. I don't think we have to wait for mid-century for this to happen. And in our estates, we have adopted a Colombian technology. It's called cableway for the fruit evacuation. Other mitigating plans include methane capture in all our 14 mills. So that's the IOI experience. The
Thank
CGM
you,
one is
Hala. But the role of the board in that, could we hear more about that?
the board, of course, you're asking about expertise and all that. So I really honestly feel that, if you're on the board, you want to ask management the right questions. You yourself need to be knowledgeable, correct? So I think, board directors have honestly, you have to be, go for some upskilling, go for training. A lot of us have, there's so many courses out there. I've done the ESG course for sustainability for corporations. So, one needs to. And the CGM experience, I like to say this because, you just asked me the question. So when we started CGM in 2019, this was way ahead of everybody else, even the regulators. And we went to all the PS because our mission was to get PLCs to start their net zero journey. So a lot of companies were ready. They said, okay, we want to start, ready to embrace net zero and all that. But there were companies that were like, oh, climate change is not real. It's not going to impact us. So,
Indeed, the board members themselves who are refusing.
Yep. And because, we were independent directors addressing other directors of boards. But the best part is, fast forward to September 2022, Bursa says you've got this enhanced statutory reporting framework, mandatory TCFD. The same companies, Michelle, came to us and asked us where we could get a sustainability officer, a
There
chief
you go.
sustainability
They
officer.
finally woke up.
Better still, could we have an
Better
ESG
late than never.
director who could hit the ground running? They wanted an ESG director hitting the ground running. So this is the funny part that, it's so sad that regulatory pressure is, causing companies to push ahead. It's sad, but that's
Perhaps,
it.
yeah, we needed that stick because the carrot wasn't working, right? Valentino, you're nodding away. Share your experience with us, but you're in a mining sector. I would say you're in a
I would like to hopefully correct that. I sit as an independent director of a listed mining company, but what's very interesting from this conversation is hopefully, I can humbly share my experience. Before even the word climate was in vogue as early as 2000, we already issued the first, they call it green bond then, but it was actually an adaptation measure to help decongest some tributaries for a bay in Palawan in the Philippines. That was when I was still working for a investment bank, RCBC Bank. After that, I had a 13-year career at IFC at the World Bank. So I worked in Lao PDR. We did some hydro projects there. We did geothermal in the Philippines. I was in Nepal for 4 years. We actually helped them in some policy work, especially for the upland areas, for the mountains. Landslides happens almost weekly there, and with the continued deforestation, flood control, It's funny, people don't think it floods up in the mountains. It does.
Does.
Because
And
they
all
think
these
it's only
roles that you held, Valentino, were they on boards? All of them?
the recently, of course, with the
Yes.
age, so I started serving in boards.
Yes. So do share
And
your board experience in this.
yes. So
Yes.
really, I mean, if you the best way to approach it with boards, especially as with ICD members, is to approach climate as a risk management tool.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay, because that way it will affect the results and the performance of the companies.
Absolutely.
It makes sense to do things in the proper way. You limit liability. Okay, you build resilience the best you can. I never really believed in mitigation because we are totally helpless against nature. Adaptation is a proper word that I would use. We can
Right.
only adapt. We can only sort of armor ourselves by adapting practices that make sense.
So you need to be agile as well, right?
Shortening supply chains, being mindful, doing like in the mining company, we've done geohazards to make sure that the communities, first of all, are not affected. Make sure that all the tailing ponds are captured. Okay, make sure that they can survive strong rains and earthquakes. Now, my current job with ICCP, we happen to have gotten awards as Hall of Fame from the Environment Ministry because we started water treatment plants, we started doing flood retention ponds. All of our developments we've already engineered them to handle 100-year floods. Unfortunately, they're now happening every 10 years.
Yeah. So indirectly, that's also mitigating, I presume, against the impact on the environment, right?
You do the best you can, but unfortunately, as I mentioned, you're having 100-year events every 5 years now. I mean, it's mind-boggling. You're getting what, 2 months rain in an hour?
Yeah, that's true.
It's very hard to plan for those things.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you. And I will come back. I'm glad you mentioned
Michelle, if I could just interject, I'm sorry I'm disrupting your flow, but just to add to what Valentino, I think risk, the way you view it as a risk is important, but I think that one thing that sometimes we forget is those risks do have opportunities that come with it.
Exactly.
I think that that's where the board needs to, sometimes at management level, you might not see it, but as a board, that is your job to look at how can we turn that into an opportunity. So I think that's one thing I wanted to add to that.
Thank you. And I'm glad we brought up risks because we were going to address it a bit later, but since it's been brought up, I will do a round robin again on this. So Ahila, in terms of risk and opportunities, as you mentioned, and I'm glad you mentioned that, but in terms of energy, real estate companies, how do then they manage their risk mitigation or risk adaptation, shall I say, strategies in their respective portfolios, and given your experience?
Okay, so let's unpack that a bit. Let's look at it as three components, right? So you've got climate change mitigation, right? And you've got climate change adaptation, which is acknowledging that it's going to happen. What are we going to do about it? And then you've got climate change disclosure, which is sort of like the way that we have check and balance for all of us, right? Are we doing the right thing? So those are the three things that we need to have as a strategy. What can we mitigate? What can we adapt to? And how do we go about disclosing it, right? And then, of course, with disclosure comes the narrative, which then boosts your own branding as a company, right? So for property sector or property development sector or real estate, those things can be done easily with technology, right? So you've got smart building systems, right? There's also going back to the basics as an architect, you design it so that like in the Northern Hemisphere, this you know where the evening sun, morning sun is going to happen, that kind of thing. So you make sure that you have passive design that helps with that, right? So that starts at the point of design. There's also, when you look at real estate development, the climate science is out there, right? So when you do land banking strategies, you know where the sea level is going to rise. So, I mean, be smart, don't buy land in that area. I mean, that's what the board needs to ask the right questions at that point, right? So that's one of the ways of looking at it. Then there's always climate scenario planning, and you can use digital twin cities, which is part of technology, to do your scenario planning, right? And then efficient management systems of the buildings themselves, right? And there's also solar panels for energy, rainwater harvesting and all of this. So that covers sort of how you would look at it from the perspective of real estate. With the energy sector, because I represent Valesto, which is an upstream oil and gas, as a drilling company, there's always looking at, say, CCUS, carbon capture and storage systems, right? And there's ways in which you can make your drill rigs more efficient as well, right? Make sure they use less energy, try to find ways in which you can ensure that the consumption of diesel that you have on rigs is lowered and monitored and reported, and look at ways in which you can reduce your own carbon footprint. Generally, upstream oil and gas has got the least amount of carbon footprint anyway, right? Because most of it is at the downstream and midstream.
Yeah.
So that is saving grace, I suppose. But at the end of the day, you do whatever you can to try to manage it. So looking at efficiencies, making sure there are no leakages, your equipment is up to standard, maintained properly, all of that. So I think that it's not rocket science at all. It's something that you would do practically anyway. So, yeah.
Thank you. Esther, over to you now.
Yes.
Your experience.
Certainly, I agree with, just follow up on what Ahila said. And I'm from the real estate sector. We design and build and also manage property, in 29 countries and regions. And mind you that built environment has actually almost 40% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Yeah. So whether how you design, how you build, what material you procure, and how you manage properties and assets are very, very important. And if I can just link it to the 4I strategy we talk about, just now I talk about integration. Sustainability has to be integrated into your business strategy, current and growth strategy, not just looking at today, not just looking at the past. And we need to look at the past, the data, and we have conducted 3 rounds of climate change scenario planning already, and conducting the 4th round, and looking at how we put a price tag to the possible physical and transitional risks. That is important. Without measuring, you don't know how to manage. So yes, from a design perspective and all that. And then the second one is actually about innovation. Just now, Alias already said that actually technologies are available, but they don't come cheap or free. So how do you deploy it and effectively to achieve the low carbon goals? And of course, we are also committed to SBTi reduction target since 2018. How to align to now we have upgraded up the bar to level to 1.5. When we first started, it was 2-degree warmer scenario, and now it's already 1.5 degree. So the second I come into the picture, innovation to move the needle. Mitigation is a given. If you don't drive adaptation aggressively, you will never be able to decarbonize towards net zero. So that is the second I. And like I said, it's not cheap. So you need to invest to, in technology or even R&D, and build capacity and how to deploy technology effectively, down the whole life cycle. Not just when you build, and also how you manage property, because 20% of greenhouse gas emission actually are on the operation, and 70% of buildings here today, we will still have them by 2050. So older buildings are not as, energy or resource efficient. And how do we retrofit to make sure that they, raise the performance? So that is the third I. The last I is about
Sorry,
impact.
the third I was?
Investment. So you need to invest in R&D, invest in mobilizing capital. So just now, Valentina talked about bond, and we actually issued the first green bond in Singapore, packed to our building on energy efficiency in 2017 April. So that's how started the whole, really fast moving, sustainable finance in the building sector, and we have already accumulated about 9 billion worth of sustainable finance in different format, like bond, loan, especially sustainability linked loan. In Singapore, it has grown for almost 10 times over the last 6 years. So investment is very important. How do you
the last I?
Capital? The last I is about impact. What you do and you don't do. there is a impact, the action, but that will link to the cause of inaction. And then, of course, if you can turn it into opportunity, growth opportunity, that will really create long-term value. But whatever sustainability or green building investment, don't look at short term. You have to put on a mid to long term. It will not immediately generate the value that you want, but in a long run, the cost of investment will definitely be lower than the cost of inaction. Yeah.
Thank you, Esther. Carla, in your view and on your board's obviously consideration, strategy, risk. Obviously, we're talking about financial oversight. How do we do this, and how do we oversee management who are obviously running the day-to-day?
Okay, so I think, like Valentino said, Michelle, addressing climate risks is basically risk management, right? Just like we would be, looking at corruption risks, which we spend a lot of time on the board, financial integrity. Likewise, climate risk, we have to give it, equal emphasis. And I think in a way, it is about also educating staff. And how do you do this? On one of the boards that I sit on, we have every year, the 6,000 staff have to sit for an integrity test. And event directors, we have to get 80%. And really, you think it's simple, but it's not, because you've got to understand the nuances of Section 17A of our MACC Act. So likewise, you need everyone in your organization to understand climate change, climate risk, what the opportunities are. What do? You need to, first of all, do roadshows, maybe send out questionnaires to your staff, make them understand that, climate change is real, it's there, get your staff involved. In IOI, for example, every other year we have an innovation competition where everybody, all the business units have to participate. And what happens is, whatever they come up with in the innovations, we are the judges. We have to make sure that, it's aligned to climate change as well. Your innovation, how does that impact climate change? Or has it
sustainable, obviously, right?
Absolutely. So I think, basically it's creating awareness, because they said, you can't work in silos. Everyone, including the tea lady, they say needs to know about, sustainability or climate change. So really build an awareness, make sure everyone, for us in the plantation sector, it's been such a long journey, 20 years of sustainability. So it's I wouldn't say it's a non-issue, but, we've gotten there. But, for others, like those companies where they're looking for an ESG director to help them, hit the ground running, they are suddenly, put in a situation where they just don't know where to start, So these guys really you need someone to help them build awareness, and it's the board. And like I said, the board needs to have the expertise themselves. There's really no two ways about it. I think
that's right. You can get, as you say, the climate, expert on the board, but that's the one champion. But everyone needs to rally around that.
Absolutely.
So knowledge is key. We're all talking about knowledge. Obviously, in Malaysia, we do run the Leading for Impact, which is a sustainability program for PLC directors. But there's lots more that can be done still, right? And we do see that even in our sessions of that program, that majority of people are still nowhere near there. Some even at the lower end, not even knowing and hearing things for the first time. So you see that mix of experience and the mix of how, boards, and these are all board members going through their journeys. So Valentino, how do we then integrate climate risk into strategy and into operations?
First of all, I'm learning a lot from all of you. This is wonderful.
I like to hear that. We're all learning.
I can just write everything down.
Yes.
No, but really, as far as the practice that I'm doing now, it's really at the board level. You really have to embed it into the governance of the board itself. Because I agree that the permeation or the trickling down is slow, but if you can start with the board using governance as embedded into the governance, climate should really not be some one-off thing. Okay, it should really be embedded into the culture. Once you have it in the board, then you start permeating it. You walk the talk, so to speak. Because I mean, it's obvious now that it's not going away. That's for sure.
In
So
fact,
people
it's
really
coming
have
on
to deal with it.
stronger.
Yeah, stronger than ever. We had 6 typhoons in the last month.
That's
Never
right. You
happened
do.
before.
Okay, yeah, that's right.
It's crazy. It's crazy. So really, it's a matter of the urgency is there. Okay. Now you have to determine, of course, risk and climate. I go back again to risk. I'm sorry, but it's really becoming synonymous, if you ask me. You cannot address climate without addressing the risks involved.
Yes.
So, once you take that mindset, you always, of course, continuing education is there. The materials, there's tremendous materials out there. All you need to do is you have to be living in a cave, if you don't have all the literature. It's just out there. And I agree with, Ahila on the design. City developments is tremendous. If you can, again, the governance should really be the driving force, because you can know all the data, you can know the consequences, but if you choose to ignore it, nothing will happen.
Yes.
It really has, and it has to hurt sometimes. That's why you're saying, Kalaniti said it has to hurt sometimes for people to realize that you have to do something about it. You have to embed it into the DNA of the board and into the corporates. Otherwise, you will suffer.
Thank you. And I'm going to go on to that.
Sorry, can I just add on to what Valentino said, that, I think basically it's understanding your business, right? And once you've done the scenario planning, you know what the risks are going to be. So just, address it. For example, I know some of the plantation company where, they're already finding that sea level rise is hurting them. They've built bunds, okay? But building bunds is one thing. Maintaining the bunds is another thing, because that's costing them a lot of money. The crabs go make holes, and then, the water seeps in. And they're also, growing mangrove. But these are the risks that you need to, address. And once you know what they are, just go ahead and do it, So it's not like, oh my God, I didn't know. You've already done the planning. You know, these are the risks. You just need to say you have to address it. Say tomorrow, we were talking about flooding. The Klang Valley is supposed to be flooded in 2050, but 2021, we were already flooded. And there are properties there. They have to decide whether they want to move it now or just sit cool and wait for the next flood. And billions, we suffered billions, economic chaos in 2021. So people know. It's just some people are just sitting back. Okay, never mind. The others are taking action.
Yeah,
I
think we
just
see
to-
that as well. Yes, that's right. Sorry,
Sorry.
Ahil, do see that.
Just to add to that, right? I think the way it will happen is it'll come to an inflection point where people can't insure the stuff that they have.
It's already happening. It's already happening.
It's happening in Florida, right? You can't
Premiums go
insure the
through the roof,
properties.
which they slowly are, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
And that is what is going to happen. And that is when they will realize that not taking action is going to cost them more than doing something about it. Because right now it's always a cost benefit analysis. Yes, we need to do this, but it's going to cost us this much, right? And we are trying to go quarter by quarter to announce good results and all that. So eventually come to an inflection point where you will realize that what you should have done would have been 20 years ago.
Thank you. And I was just going to say that as well. We realized in the classroom, as I mentioned earlier, that many haven't even reached that inflection point, Ahila, but some are. And actually, you can't avoid it. And I'm glad you raised insurance, because these are things that impact all of us every day, right? And if you don't see that how it impacts insurance for one, you can't say it doesn't impact you. It will impact all of us. But I agree with Kala, there's no one size fits all. And therefore, when you choose as a board member to sit on a board, choose wisely, because you need to be able to value add to that particular business, right? And now that we're talking a lot about the physical aspects of climate transition, shall I say, can I ask you all, how do we then, as a board, take on a more hands-on role in actively planning for this physical transition, right? Maybe I'll start with Ahila. I'll do the same flow on that.
I think there's always a fine line as a board member. How much can you do without interfering with the day-to-day business, which is not part of your role, right? I think the key thing that you can do and be of value to the organization and to the board is to keep yourself informed of what is happening, right? And with that, you can ask the right questions at the meetings and as well as guide the management, because it's not so much as you get your hands dirty, you go down and you start helping them, do their reports. So it can't happen. It doesn't happen that way. But if you yourself are not informed and don't know what questions to ask, it's not helping anyone. So you need to stay updated on everything that's happening. So sessions like this help, right? To
And
keep
sharing
everybody updated.
as
Yes,
well,
sharing.
right?
Yes.
Esther.
Okay, I think well, definitely dealing with climate, nature, risk management are all intertwined. And in fact, insured losses have actually on the rise, tremendously. And a lot of companies actually are paying a lot more premiums than in the past, and this will continue to happen. And if you look at the top risks in the next 10 years, according to World Economic Forum's risk survey, failures to mitigate climate change is number one, and failure to for climate change adaptation is number two. Natural disaster, biodiversity loss, these are all top priority. So how do you look at all these wide spectrum of threats that will impact on your capital, financial capital, natural capitals, and then social capital? All these are actually linked to the performance of the company. So at the board level, definitely the strategy is very important. How do you prevent? And this is actually, and in fact, we have already looking at it, not just about decarbonization and digitalization and disclosure, but how do you, in the end of the day, is to mitigate, risk that can really hit your bottom line and hit your, to make sure that there's no stranded assets in your, in the companies that you advise. And yes, keeping informed is very important, because you can't expect the director come and produce my sustainability report. It's my team's role to produce a report, but we engage them right from the start for materiality study. We interview, we get external consultants to start identifying every year on the key top material ESG issues. So from there, we set the direction, and directors are involved in every step. And how do we, rank them from number 1 to number 15? And how do we, look at strategies that will address the risk? And most important thing, really the devil is in the implementation. Everyone can set goals, but the key challenge is how do you implement it, and how do you measure it towards interim targets and also 2030 target, 2050 targets. So all these need a lot of, knowledge and skill set and commitment that filter into every business and operational unit. How do you build, design, and manage property with the targets together? And the board has to be informed and been involved in almost every step. If they are not well informed, they won't know how to really, help to make the strategic decision, make the $1 million investment decision. So I think the board has to, really play a very key role, is to work together with the management. The management operational may be, a level at a very good positions to advise certain strategies, certain, equipment, investment, and technology. But the board must be able to, other panelists say, you must ask the right question, and also support and work with management together. How do we strategically and operationally work towards like a twin engines towards, net zero and sustainable, businesses. Yeah,
Thank you,
that's how
Esther.
we engage the business and the board at every level. Yeah, and I'm also, report mainly to like I said, is the board sustainability committee. We have constant, communication, not just meeting, but we also, even WhatsApp each other on trends and all that, because the world is changing very fast. Regulations.
That's right.
Very
Indeed.
fast. And sustainability reporting standards is like every other month you will see some new things coming up. So if the board is not well informed, it's very hard. And interaction between the management and the board is very, very crucial. And we have every year, we have 12 years now, the board sustainability, forum together with senior management, with our group senior management and the whole group listed company. So without communication, you don't know what is the direction. Without setting direction and setting the long-term strategic goals, you won't know how to guide the operations to.
Thank you, Esther. I will move on to Carla now. Thank you for your input. Carla, physical transition risk. Thank you.
Okay, so
the board. Thank you.
How do we progress and move management? I like the way you said, Michelle, that we should choose the right boards. So since we are the informed ones, I think we supposedly knowing the topic, we should really, first of all, get everybody on the board on our side, encourage everyone, because if you're the one who supposedly knows the subject matter, so influence your other board members, okay? And then I think structure is so important. Make sure that at the board you can have your full board and then the board associate committee, but there must be a steering committee that's chaired by the CEOs of management is also aligned with us. But at the same time, I think, as a board, you can also influence management. I sit on the board remuneration nomination committee. So at one day I said, how about setting, KPIs for management, aligned to climate action and ESG. And the CEO said, yes, why not? Immediately took it upon it. And today we have ESG KPIs for all the C-suite. And that's really helping them innovate, and they are like, okay, we better do something, otherwise our bonuses are affected. And it's really wonderful that, they took it on as a challenge, and they've become very innovative as well, coming up with great ideas on how to address climate change and issues and challenges. So I think, start with us, because again, like I said, if you don't know, you're not going to be asking the right questions. And then from there, influence others, and then, cascade that down to getting management excited as well. I think I'll stop there, Michelle.
Thank you, Carla. I like the ESG in KPIs. I think that's very important. Do you think boards should have similar KPIs as well?
Absolutely. I think, boards can, start looking at how we can also align our board performance to KPIs on, ESG, climate, etc.
Okay, wonderful. Valentino, last but not least, share with us your views.
Very, very animated, very rich discussions. But I mean, as I mentioned, we've been hearing KPIs, performance, embedding it into the board. It's funny, but it just occurred to me now, inaction should also be a KPI. Not acting. Yeah, because inaction is an action, doing nothing. And that's people tend
how
to
does
forget
that become a KPI in action?
Well, that's why you have you build the muscle memory, the discipline of being able to think with a simulator in mind. You do simulations, you do scenarios. You really don't need a huge imagination. Right. Just look around you, what's happening. So you don't say, oh, that's not going to happen. It's happening, folks, all the time, all around us. So you need to sort of put your company in that particular scenario. And it's not hard to do, because that's the environment. That is the weather. People talk about it a lot, but they don't know that it's starting to affect them. Your supply chains, your carbon footprint. I mean, something as simple as LED lights. From that to huge flood retention ponds to, as you mentioned, building mangroves. How do you manage the crabs that will protect? Then you start a crab farm in between. You know what I mean? It's a matter of thinking creatively.
Yeah, but
outside the box.
coming and getting down to the ground as well, thinking on the ground as well.
And as I said, the KPIs, in almost all of the boards I sit in, the CEO is there. So it can be a symbiotic relationship because they're accountable to. I mean, accidents really happen all the time. I mean, data is the use of data now. There's tremendous data. You can use it to your advantage. Technology is there for you to be able to do the simulations now easily. Before it's cumbersome, you do this Excel, you do the computations by hand. No, not anymore.
Yes.
There's AI to help you. So you can actually start the scenario simulations embedded into the system so that you'll know exactly where you stand, and you do the cost benefit analysis of action versus inaction.
That's right. That's right. And I'm glad you raised some points. Firstly, about, do boards, we do this when we do strategy sessions for boards at ICDM for clients. There's the scenario, what we talk about. Do you stay on the balcony or are you in the dance on the floor? Or how do you balance that out? I'm going to throw this out to you. How do you balance that out when you talk about climate resilience? Anyone?
Well, you're the conductor. If you ask me, you're the conductor in the dance. I mean, you can sometimes fleet in and out. You don't have to be sort of just a spectator. You cannot be a spectator. You're in the board.
Right.
I mean, the expertise can be embedded by continuing education. I mean, we are all required to do AMLA. Now in the boards, all of this, anti-money laundering, integrity. So why can't we do continuing education on adaptation, mitigation, climate resilience?
That's right.
I mean, it's as real as money laundering. It's as real as integrity checks. What prevents us from making that a mandatory course?
Yes, that's right. Anyone else?
Extending from the dance, I think first you can even choose the pace, the beat. How fast you want to go, you want to dance a slow dance, you want to do really upbeat and everybody fast forward. I think the director are really setting the direction and the pace and providing the resources and advice and enabling management, because you can talk until the cow come home, but if you don't give me resources, you don't give me manpower, you don't give me budget, I can't do magic to decarbonize the operations and to green our products and our operations. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, but we don't also want to look at it as a cost, right? You do need to invest in this. And Carla, I see you nodding.
Yeah. So Michelle, I think I agree with Esther in that, especially in Malaysia now, Michelle, right? We have no choice. It's all mandatory. So we have to address the 11 common materiality matters. You have to do it. And its objective is there's no yes or no. You've got to tell them, how many.
The NSRF coming up as well, the National Sustainability Reporting Framework.
Boards today have no choice but to get involved. And you can't even say, there are directors who are not aligned. Everybody has to be aligned because it's compulsory, it's mandatory. So, we have gone one step. I mean, in the last 2 years, we've gone multiple steps ahead to address this. So really, there's no one who is saying, we don't agree or anything. Everybody's agreeing because it's regulatory compliance, do or die, no choice. But having said that, some boards are just pushing ahead. They know what's going to affect them. They're putting in the money. They know they have to do it. Others are not so lucky, fortunate in the sense that they might not have the resources. So they are taking it, one step lower, and, they will take it to, yes, they have to comply, but we will do whatever needs to be done, but I'm not going to go rushing out there because I just can't. So there's, I'm at the CEO Action Network. We have 3 different categories of the sectors, the companies: laggards, intermediates, and advanced sectors. The advanced sectors are helping the laggards and the intermediate, because these guys don't even know what to do. So, and we're all volunteers. We are helping each other. It's camaraderie. It's fantastic, but it's just helping each other move along better.
Exactly. I like, so that kind of, aligns with what Esther said about setting the pace, right?
Yeah.
Ahila, your views on that?
I think generally in most companies, and it doesn't matter how ambitious you are or not, a lot of the times what I see is people take the wait and see approach, right? And that's just because you want to have safety in numbers, you don't want to be in the forefront, and again, is there any competitive advantage to be the first in line? Now, if you're in a sector which is highly competitive, or if you are a monopoly, maybe that makes sense because you're going to be the only one you're going to have to do it, right? So I think that what I see on boards most of the time and across companies, right, is that a lot of them take the wait and see approach. Now, I hope that they don't wait too long, and that it is, because that's the danger, right? That's the danger. You wait and see, and when do you jump in? So I like what Valentino said, that you can't afford to stay on the sideline as a board member. You need to read the room, understand where the business is, and where our risks are, but at the same time look at it in a bigger picture, what is happening nationally and globally, and guide accordingly, right? And what Kala said is absolutely true. It's not a one size fits all, right? There will be companies that are not going to have that capacity to do it. So that's where you need to be able to read the room, but understand the global implications. Right. So it's not an easy thing to do. It's a very delicate balance. I don't think we have a science to say you need to do this and then you will. It's not something that happens where you can monitor it and you can say you can do this at this point in time. You need to see as things unfold. Now you've got American elections coming out and Trump is back in power. The dynamics will change as well. And what I see is a lot of people are saying, America is not going to be taking it seriously. Do we really need to take it seriously? So that is another conversation to be had. How do you push? How do you influence the board? Because this is something that goes deeper for you as a practitioner or as a person who's been doing this for a long time. How do you look at this? Because Trump is a moment in time, a screenshot in time, right? Whereas the impact of climate change it's going to be global and it's going to last much longer than him. So that's where the delicate balance. So you need to know what's happening globally but read the room as well.
And
Sorry, Michelle, can I just add on to Ahila? I mean, we've already, I think, one term of Trump we've already been through, so I don't think he's going to be a big problem. But, it's a pity that he will, go against the Paris Agreement. But at the same time, I think at the end of the day, we always say, we want to save the planet. Everybody has to do their bit. Now, no more pointing fingers and, oh, they didn't do that. We all have to, individuals, governments, countries, whatever, everybody has to play a role. Otherwise, we are going to be just, the future generation is the one that's going to be suffering, immensely. So, yeah, I mean, Trump, pity, but, what do? He's coming for his second term. One term, he survived.
Exactly, completely agree. So that's why, we need to internalize it, all of us, right? And just set the tone and do what's right. I'm going to touch on, we've spoken about all the vulnerabilities that we all face and companies face. We've spoken about risk management. I'm going to just touch upon innovations and trends and tools. I think some of you have touched on it, Carla and Valentino. What innovations or trends do you see emerging now that can help boards manage climate resilience? And what have you used in your respective organizations? I'll start with Ahila.
I'm like mangsa keadaan with my name. Right. Like what I said earlier, right? In terms of innovation, what you do see is digital twin cities as a way of scenario planning. Right. And that is something that you can do, especially if you're in real estate. You also see technology being improved in terms of carbon capture, systems, as well as now there's a lot of talk about hydrogen and how that could be a potential source of renewable energy. So there's a lot of technology out there. That the question is not the technology, but which is the right technology for your company, right? And that's where there is going to be a bit more of a push and pull, because a lot of it is very nascent, and nobody knows, the proof is not in the pudding yet, because it'll take a certain period of time to actually get to that. So a lot of it is a gamble, it's a risk. In order to mitigate your risk, you need to take a risk, right?
Correct.
Potentially harness the opportunities there. So I think that's where the difficulty comes in as a board. Sometimes you don't know what you don't know. So in terms
Very
of
often, I would
innovation,
say
there's a
that.
lot of innovation out there. It's just to understand what is the right innovation. I think that's where I as well find difficulty.
And Valentino, I'm going to jump to you for a change. The right tech. What is the right tech for you?
I think you have to put yourself in a position where innovation is something that will come in. Okay, you put yourself in a position to accept the innovation as it occurs. How do you do that? My own, imperfect view is to really embed the whole climate scenario into your governance. It should be part and parcel of as natural as breathing, because otherwise you'll stop breathing, because it's going to affect your business no matter what you do. It's really going to affect the way we live. It's already doing that already as we speak. So, putting into the KPIs, but I think you really have to building the muscle memory, the discipline. Okay, building into the KPIs the fact that where are we? What could go wrong? Okay, I mean, cost benefit analysis is always there. The cost of inaction should always be embedded in any decision. And it's really just discipline and governance, if you ask me.
Thank you. Kala.
So I think, Michelle, for us in the plantation sector, innovation, it comes with, we are now looking at saving time, right? So we've gone with AI tools for emissions calculations and reporting. We are blessed in the plantation sector that we have biomass. So, savings on scope 2 emissions, we use biomass instead of fossil fuels, which is your major emitter in our boilers and all that. And that's a big saving. And also, methane gas, that's a bigger polluter. It's 22 times more, hazardous than CO2. So methane capture, biogas that we harness is also it's a great energy source. So that way, I think in the plantation, we are really truly blessed that we've got all this transitioning to renewable energy, has brought about lots of innovations in technology as well. So so that's what's happening for us. AI tools for even drones and harvesting and all that is something that we're looking at.
Okay, fantastic. Esther, innovation in your company.
Well, we are very next to the equator, honestly. Heat is one of the top priority in ASEAN region, especially. April this year was really the hottest month, on record. So 40 degree is almost becoming norm already, almost everyone. So heat mitigation and, how do we design, how do we orientate building, how do we maximize ventilation? All these can be, dealt with using AIs and design. And how do you phase out, decarbonization? How do you phase out the use of diesel and construction site, providing alternative? Everybody will know that, we must decarbonize, but how do you deploy and apply technologies that can really move the needle? That's the key things. And how do you use, digital, platforms to help building owner to allocate resources, energy, and manpower in managing operating buildings. Those are very, very important. So we have like sensors, thousands of sensors in, guiding us where to put resources, and even manpower in Singapore is very expensive. So how do you deploy manpower is also very key. But one thing I would like to highlight that apart from energy solutions, to help the world to transition to net zero, nature-based solutions is on the rise.
Absolutely.
And in fact, in our region here, we actually are blessed with very rich biodiversity. And how do we deploy, especially in Singapore, we are renewable energy challenged. So we need to look to, nature-based solution, how to use greenery, water feature, and how to use, even apply circularity, turning waste into, valuable resources, and building materials and all that are very important aspects that we need to look at. So turn to nature, work together, use wind, use light, use greenery that can really help us to cool the temperature. In one of our buildings, completed almost 10 years ago, and we use a green wall, the vertical green wall, which has entered Guinness Books of Record, 24-story high, which after resources to come in to do research, it really helped to cool the internal spaces of these 48 units by 3 degrees Celsius. So greenery, nature-based solutions are on the rise. And that's why TNFD, the nature-based, financial reporting is so important. So
Absolutely.
I think in our country, in our region here, we need to turn to nature, whether it is on land or even underwater. How do you protect marine life? How do you protect, life on land? Biodiversity on land is very important.
Yeah, completely agree. And in fact, the COP, recently in Colombia on biodiversity, and our minister, Nazmi, was also there. I think that's very, very important, and that's running in tandem now as another COP.
At COP here too, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, we've not got any questions so far, so I'm going to do one last question before we sum up. And I'll just throw it out, and whoever wishes to answer first can jump up. If you could make one big ask of corporates, not necessarily your own corporates, but corporates or governance or governments or regulators to accelerate and facilitate climate resilience, what would it be? What would that ask be? Anyone?
I'll start. Since we're going alphabetical anyway, I'll start. Okay, one big ask, I wish I had more, but since it's a one big ask, to accelerate the National Adaptation Plan. Simply because then we can integrate the corporates, government, community actions, and then it's backed by enforceable policies and measurable outcomes. And why do we want this? Why does it matter? Because then we have scalability and we have a coordination point. Right? And then you have, with mandating, then you have accountability. So that's important. And then the other key thing that is missing is the communities that are involved. So as a corporate, we always, the S in ESG is always overlooked, right? And that's one of the communities in which you operate. They could help you with the actions to make things better as far as climate change is concerned, or advise you, or tell you, look, this is what has been happening in our communities, right? So mobilizing that whole huge segment is important, right? And I think that those are the key areas we need to look at. So if one big ask is to hurry up and come up with the National Adaptation Plan.
Yeah. Michelle, can I go next? And I'd just like to add on to what Ahila said. I think that's so important, National Adaptation Plan. And I know that the MP for Gasing, Rajiv, can never get his surname, Vishakaran, I think he's working with some other MPs on the National Adaptation Plan. So that's great news. But as far as I'm concerned, let me start with my CGM experience. So regulators are doing a fantastic job. That's why, CGM managed
They're playing catch up, right? The rest of us.
Correct. So Bursa with and SC with the NSRF, the National Statutory Reporting Framework, and getting us all, with mandatory TCFD, which is now the IFRS S2, all that is working very well for us. So that's regulators. Governments, I think, they're also trying very hard. Nick Nazmi talks about the enactment of the National Climate Change Act. He's talking about the climate change policies. But, policies, like we heard this morning, are wonderful, but there is really no review and implementation, enforcement. So we need that to happen. And finally, as far as corporates are concerned, just go there and start to measure your emissions. That's all we're asking of you. Simple. Just understand your business units. Just go out and start your measurements. And like Esther said, unless you measure, you can't manage. Yeah. And also, I think if you set targets, even it's at the board level that we must ask management, have you met your targets? Have you reviewed it? Are you there? That's our job. Yeah. So I think that's what we would ask. So governments, regulators, corporations, that's all my ask is. Thank you.
Thank you,
Okay,
Carla.
since you mentioned me, Carla, thank you so much. Just simple ABC, okay? Whether government, policymaker, or businesses, align yourself, to global goals and also help the country to achieve the NDC. It says everybody's responsibility, alignment and adaptation. B is make it a stronger business case, because definitely cost of inaction and action, and such as carbon tax and all that are really front and center already. So make it a business case so that you can scale up. And then the last one is collaboration. No one policymaker, no one companies can drive change. You have to include your whole value chain, your supply chain, and even your building users, your customers. Everybody have to step up and fast forward the change. So A, B, and C, everybody should be aligned. Yeah.
Thank you. Before D, we all, I won't say this. So, Valentino.
Look, I mean, I can
disaster,
only listen.
D for disaster. Okay.
I can. Oh, yeah, yes, I agree.
Good one.
No, I listen, ladies. I can only listen with envy. Okay, remember,
E,
because
that's
you're
the E.
Malaysia, Singapore. Okay, I mean, in the Philippines, we're still a bit governance challenged as far as the regulatory framework is concerned. So my big ask really is more on carrot and stick, maybe more multilateral intervention. Less predatory actions, because we are the biggest among. I think Indonesia and Philippines are the most vulnerable. And unfortunately, you need a certain degree of governance level to be able to implement all of these things. And I wish I'm wrong, but not quite there. So that's my big ask, is an evolution. Unfortunately.
That's the E, evolution.
But thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you all. And I'll just do a quick sum up of the takeaways from today. We talked about knowledge, obviously, knowledge, upskilling, for boards. You can't ask the right questions if you don't know the right things. You need to know the right answers as well before you start asking the questions. Delivery, Ahila mentioned delivery, social and economic sustainability, profit versus resilience. Yeah, there's that dichotomy. The board and management share the same responsibility. Ask the right questions, again, back to upskilling. Risk management and risk adaptation. The 4 I's from Esther, thank you. Integration, innovation, investment, and impact. Climate risk. Education is important in terms of climate risk. Embedding climate risk governance into the board. Understanding our businesses, right? So no one size fits all. Staying informed and sharing, like we have today. Influence and structure, I think Carla mentioned that as well, in terms of the board. And in terms of innovation, we've talked about having the right tools, having the right tech. Again, no one size fits all. Choose the right technology and the right tools to help you. And as we know, boards don't know what they don't know. But and in terms of closing the asks, accelerating the national adaptation plan, thank you, in Malaysia at least. Policy and implementation, coming from Carla. Regulation, no problem. measure, 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 and monitor, 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 shall I say. And thank you, Esther, the ABCs, we like this. Alignment and adaptation to global goals and trends, having the right business case, and collaboration. Before the D, disaster, we should then, as Valentino says, we need an evolution, yes, and more multilateral intervention. Thank you all, and thank you to our audience today for staying with us. I think we've had a very, very enlightening session. Thank you to all the board directors here as well for allowing us to share your time and your thought today. Thank you again, and I'll hand it back to Avi. Thank you all. Great to see you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Bye, Michelle. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you to all the esteemed panelists for their insights. And thank you all for joining today's session on climate resilience, subnational leadership. Ladies and gentlemen, as we draw this crucial session to a close, it is clear that subnational leadership is a cornerstone of climate resilience. Local and regional actors are not only the first responders to climate change, but also the architects of innovative, community-driven solutions that inspire change from the ground up. Let's take the insights shared today as a call to action to support and empower these leaders, foster collaboration, and scale solutions that ensure a sustainable and inclusive future. Before you go, please take a moment to scan the QR code for our feedback survey. Your input is greatly appreciated. As always, all our sessions are recorded and will be available on our official CGM YouTube channel for anyone wishing to revisit these insights. The recordings will be time-tagged with accompanying blog posts to follow. And don't forget to watch the live stream for the Malaysia Pavilion at COP29 in Baku by visiting the official Malaysia Pavilion Facebook page or by scanning the QR code on the screen. On behalf of our team, thank you to our speakers and participants for engaging in this crucial conversation. And let us continue tomorrow for our final day, Malaysia's Diverse Voices, all for sustainability. Take care and see you tomorrow.